"They're here for me," she whispered. Then the janitor protected the CEO. Shocking when see this. The champagne glasses shattered across marble floors as three men in tactical suits breached Boston's most elite gala. CEO Evelyn Zhao's whisper cut through the chaos. "They're here for me." But before her enemies could reach her, a humble janitor stepped from the shadows, his mop replaced by movements too precise, too lethal for any ordinary man. What happened next exposed a ghost America thought was dead. Stay with me until the end of this story, and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this tale travels across the world. The Sterling Tower's grand ballroom glittered like a constellation fallen to earth. Crystal chandeliers worth more than most people's houses cast prismatic light across a sea of designer gowns and tailored tuxedos. The city of Boston stretched beyond floor-to-ceiling windows, a sprawl of amber streetlights and the dark ribbon of the Charles River cutting through the November night. Inside, 300 of America's wealthiest power brokers celebrated the annual Tech Innovation Gala with the casual arrogance of people who'd never known real fear. Evelyn Zhao stood near the western windows, a champagne flute untouched in her hand. At 34, she'd built Zhao Systems from a Harvard dorm room prototype into the nation's premier cybersecurity firm, protecting everything from banking networks to military communications. Her company's software stood between American infrastructure and the chaos that lurked in the digital dark. Tonight, she wore a midnight blue gown that cost less than her competitors' jewelry, but fit her frame with elegant precision. Her black hair was pulled into a simple chignon, and her expression carried the careful neutrality of someone who'd learned to hide fear behind composure. She was terrified. "Miss Zhao, you look distracted." Her assistant, Jennifer Park, appeared at her elbow with practiced efficiency. "The Forbes reporter wants 5 minutes, and Senator Morrison is asking about your availability for that infrastructure committee hearing." Evelyn didn't respond immediately. Her dark eyes tracked 3 men who'd entered the ballroom 6 minutes ago. She'd been counting. They wore suits that almost fit the occasion, but their movements betrayed them. The way they scanned the room wasn't social curiosity. It was tactical assessment. The slight bulges under their left arms weren't fashion statements. And the way they'd positioned themselves at 3 corners of the ballroom, creating a perfect triangulation around her position, spoke of military training or something worse. "Jennifer," Evelyn said quietly, her lips barely moving, "I need you to find the head of security. Don't rush, don't look panicked. Tell him there are 3 men, 2 o'clock by the ice sculpture, 7 o'clock near the string quartet, and 11 o'clock by the exit to the service corridor. Tell him they're armed." Jennifer's face remained professionally pleasant, but her fingers tightened on her tablet. "Are you sure?" "They're here for me." Evelyn took a sip of champagne she didn't taste, playing the part of someone engaged in casual conversation. "Go now. Smile while you do it." Jennifer nodded and glided away, her heels clicking against Italian marble that had been imported at criminal expense. Evelyn forced herself to breathe slowly, to not look directly at the men who'd come to destroy her. She'd known this moment would arrive eventually. 6 months ago, she'd testified before Congress about security vulnerabilities in critical infrastructure. She'd named names, exposed corruption, and made enemies among people who settled disputes with violence rather than lawyers. The death threats had started within a week. Her FBI contact had assured her they were credible but being handled. Handled meant she'd been assigned a security detail that followed her to work, to home, to the goddamn grocery store. But tonight, at an event attended by senators and CEOs, surrounded by Boston's elite in one of the city's most secure buildings, she'd insisted on minimal protection. She'd wanted to feel normal for one evening, to remember what life felt like before everything became threat assessment and contingency plans. That decision now felt catastrophically stupid. Michael Carter knelt on the ballroom's upper balcony level, a gray maintenance cart beside him, a polishing cloth in his weathered hands. He worked slowly, methodically, buffing the brass railing that overlooked the gala below. Most people didn't notice janitors. They were background elements, like furniture or potted plants, present but invisible. Michael had learned to appreciate this invisibility over the past 8 years. It was safer than being seen. "Daddy, are we still getting pizza after?" His daughter's voice pulled him from the careful rhythm of his work. Sophie Carter sat on a folding chair against the wall, her legs swinging beneath her, not quite reaching the floor. She was 7 years old, with her mother's soft features and Michael's gray-green eyes. Her school uniform was slightly rumpled from a day of second grade, and she clutched a worn paperback about dragons with the intense focus only children could summon. Michael set down his cloth and turned to her, his expression softening in a way it rarely did for anyone else. "Absolutely, sweetheart. Pepperoni and mushrooms, just like I promised. Can we get the cheesy bread too?" "Don't push your luck, kiddo." But his smile said she'd probably get the cheesy bread. Michael Carter looked exactly like what he was supposed to be. A middle-aged janitor with calloused hands and the kind of tired eyes that came from single parenthood and night shifts. His gray maintenance uniform hung loose on a frame that might once have been more muscular but now seemed worn down by life's smaller battles. His dark hair was threaded with premature silver, and a scar ran along his jawline, the kind that suggested a car accident or a bad fall, nothing more sinister than ordinary misfortune. Everything about him said ordinary, forgettable, safe. It was all carefully constructed fiction. Sophie returned to her book, and Michael resumed his work, but his attention was no longer on the brass railing. Something was wrong in the ballroom below. He'd felt it the moment those three men entered, a disturbance in the room's energy, like wolves entering a flock of sheep. His hands continued their polishing motion, automatic and mindless, while his mind cataloged everything his eyes saw. The man by the ice sculpture, 6'2", approximately 200 pounds, favoring his right side slightly, old injury or weapon placement. Military bearing, probably infantry based on his stance. Scanning the room in precise intervals, 30-second sweeps. The man near the string quartet, shorter, maybe 5'10", but broader. His suit jacket hung wrong on the left side, shoulder holster, likely a compact semi-automatic, ex-law enforcement possibly, or private military contractor. His eyes kept returning to the western windows. The man by the service corridor, the leader. Older, 45 or 50, with the kind of stillness that came from extensive field experience. He wasn't scanning anymore. He was locked on a target. Michael followed his sight line to a woman in a midnight blue gown, standing alone near the windows, holding her champagne like it was a security blanket. Michael's heart rate didn't increase. His breathing didn't change. But something cold and long buried stirred in his chest, muscle memory from a life he'd promised to leave behind. "Sterling Tower Security, this is Agent Hayes." The voice crackled through the earpiece of Marcus Hayes, head of security for the building. He stood in the security office 3 floors below the gala, watching a wall of monitors that showed every angle of the event. "Ms. Park, repeat your concern." Jennifer Park stood in an alcove off the main ballroom, her voice low and urgent. Ms. Zhao identified 3 men who appear to be armed. She believes they're targeting her. Marcus Hayes had worked security for 15 years. Presidential details, corporate protection, high-risk events. He'd learned to trust his instincts, and right now those instincts were screaming. He switched his radio to the channel for the 3-man team he'd positioned at the gala. "All units, we have a potential threat situation. 3 male subjects possibly armed. I'm sending their positions to your phones now." His fingers flew across the keyboard, tagging the 3 men on the monitors and pushing their images to his team's devices. The response came back immediately, clipped and professional. "Copy that. Visual confirmation on all 3 subjects. Moving to intercept." "Negative," Hayes said sharply. "Too many civilians. I want observation only until we can confirm weapons or hostile intent. Do not engage unless there's an imminent threat." But even as he gave the order, Marcus Hayes knew they were already behind the curve. The 3 men were moving now, closing the triangle around Evelyn Zhao with practiced precision. Whatever was about to happen, it would happen fast. Evelyn saw them start to move and knew she was out of time. The ballroom suddenly felt too large and too small simultaneously. All these people, all this space, and nowhere to run that wouldn't endanger someone else. She set down her champagne with deliberate care, her mind racing through options. The main exits were blocked. The windows were 40 stories up. Security hadn't arrived yet, which meant Jennifer either hadn't reached them or they were still assessing the situation. She was alone. "Evelyn Zhao." The voice came from behind her, too close. She turned to find the oldest of the 3 men, the one who'd been by the service corridor. Up close, she could see the scar tissue on his knuckles, the cold calculation in his pale blue eyes. You're going to come with us, quietly, or this room will become very loud and very red. I don't think so. Evelyn's voice was steadier than she felt. Around them, the gala continued. Conversations, laughter, the soft music of the string quartet. No one had noticed yet that anything was wrong. Whatever you think you're going to accomplish, you won't get out of this building. We're already out. The man smiled without warmth. We're ghosts, Ms. Zhao, just like you're about to be. His hand moved toward her arm and Evelyn stepped back, her heel catching on her gown. She stumbled, and in that moment of imbalance, the man's grip closed on her wrist, hard enough to bruise, hard enough to control. Don't make this difficult, he said. But Evelyn Zhao hadn't built a multi-billion-dollar company by being easy to control. She drove her free hand toward his eyes, her keys protruding between her fingers like makeshift claws. The man jerked back, surprised by the resistance, and his two partners moved in fast from their positions. That's when the shouting started. Gun! He's got a gun! The scream cut through the ballroom like a siren. A waiter had seen one of the men reach under his jacket, and in a room full of wealthy people who'd lived their entire lives insulated from violence, panic spread like wildfire. People scattered, women kicked off heels to run faster, men shoved past each other toward the exits. Crystal glasses shattered across marble. The string quartet stopped playing mid-note. The man holding Evelyn's wrist dragged her toward the service corridor, his professional calm evaporating into urgency. Move, move, move! On the upper balcony, Michael Carter stood and looked at his daughter. Sophie, I need you to do exactly what I say. Something in his voice made her drop her book and pay attention. This wasn't Daddy who made breakfast and checked homework. This was someone else, someone who spoke with absolute authority and expected instant obedience. See that red box on the wall? He pointed to a fire alarm station 20 feet away. I need you to run to it, pull that lever, and then go into the bathroom right next to it. Lock the door. Don't come out until I come get you. Do you understand? Daddy, what's happening? Sophie. He knelt down, his hands on her shoulders, his eyes locked on hers. Trust me. Go now. She ran, her small feet pounding against the floor, and pulled the fire alarm with both hands. The building erupted in electronic shrieks and flashing lights. Sprinkler systems activated, raining water across the ballroom. The panic below intensified, people scrambling for exits in a chaos of water and alarm bells. Michael watched his daughter disappear into the bathroom, heard the lock click, and then he was moving. The maintenance cart fell away. The polishing cloth dropped to the floor. Michael Carter's hands went to the underside of the brass railing he'd been cleaning, found the magnetic case he'd placed there 3 months ago during routine maintenance, and retrieved its contents, a compact tactical knife, a set of lockpicks, and a small earpiece that connected to the building's security frequencies. He'd hoped he'd never need them. Hope was a luxury he could no longer afford. Michael vaulted over the balcony railing, his hands catching the decorative stonework, his body swinging down to the main floor with a precision that spoke of countless hours of training. He landed in a crouch behind a toppled champagne table, water streaming around him, and assessed the situation with the cold clarity of someone who'd done this 100 times before. 3 hostiles, one primary target being dragged toward the service corridor. Approximately 200 panicked civilians between his position and the threat. Security teams converging, but still 30 seconds out. Too slow. Michael moved through the chaos like smoke, weaving between running guests, staying low, staying invisible. The knife was in his hand, but hidden against his forearm. His breathing was controlled, his heart rate steady. 8 years fell away like shed skin, and the man who emerged from beneath the janitor's uniform was someone else entirely. Phantom had always been good at this part, the moment when chaos needed to become order through the precise application of violence. The service corridor was accessed through a reinforced door that required a keycard. Evelyn Zhao was being pushed through it, the lead man's hand still locked on her wrist, his 2 partners flanking them with weapons now visible. The door was closing on a hydraulic hinge designed to shut slowly for safety compliance. Michael reached it with half a second to spare, his hand catching the edge, his body sliding through the narrowing gap. The 3 men were 15 feet ahead, moving fast down a white hallway that smelled of industrial cleaner and recycled air. They hadn't seen him yet. Contact! Contact! One of them had finally looked back. "We've got a tail!" The two partners turned, raising their weapons. Compact Glock 19s, professional hardware. But Michael was already moving, already inside their firing lines. His hand snapped up, the knife flashing, and the first man's gun went spinning away, blood streaming from fingers that would never hold anything properly again. Michael's elbow drove into the man's throat, a precise strike that collapsed the trachea, and the man went down choking. The second partner fired, but Michael was no longer where the gun was pointing. He'd pivoted behind the first man's falling body, using it as a shield, and came up fast with the man's dropped Glock in his hand. 2 shots, controlled and exact. The second partner took them both in the chest, center mass, and dropped without a sound. The entire engagement lasted 4 seconds. The leader still had Evelyn, and he'd pressed his own weapon against her temple. Back off, or she dies right here!" Michael stood perfectly still, the Glock held in a 2-handed grip, his aim never wavering from the 6 inches of the man's head that was visible behind Evelyn. Water dripped from his hair, his maintenance uniform was dark with moisture, and his gray-green eyes were absolutely empty of anything resembling mercy. "You're Marcus Webb." Michael's voice was flat, stating facts. "Former Delta Force. Dishonorable discharge for selling classified intel to Chinese military contractors. You've been off-grid for 6 years, working for whoever pays, doing whatever they ask. Tonight, someone paid you to kill Evelyn Zhao. You won't succeed." Webb's face went pale. "Who the hell are you?" "Let her go." "Not a chance." "I don't know who you are, Janitor, but you're not fast enough to take this shot before I—" Michael fired. The bullet passed 3 inches from Evelyn's ear, close enough that she felt the heat of its passage, and took Marcus Webb in the right eye. His grip on her loosened instantly as his body's electrical system shut down, and Evelyn stumbled forward, gasping, water-soaked and shaking. Michael caught her before she fell, steadying her with one hand while his gun stayed trained on the hallway behind them. "Are you injured?" "No, I'm—" Evelyn looked at the 3 bodies on the floor, at the man in a janitor's uniform who'd just executed a precision rescue operation that would have impressed Special Forces operators, and her brain struggled to reconcile what she was seeing. "Who are you?" "Stay behind me." Michael moved her against the wall, his body between her and any potential threats. His left hand found the earpiece in his pocket and activated it, tuning into the building security frequency. "Multiple casualties in the service corridor. I repeat, multiple casualties. Suspect is a male in maintenance clothing, armed and extremely dangerous. Evacuate the building. This is not a drill." Michael grimaced. Of course, they thought he was the threat. He'd just killed 3 men in their building during their event. Context wouldn't matter until someone stopped to ask questions, and by then, he'd be face down on the floor with zip ties cutting off circulation to his hands. "We need to move," he said to Evelyn. "Your security teams are coming, but they don't know I'm on your side yet. Can you walk?" "Yes, but—" "Then walk. Fast." They moved deeper into the service corridor, away from the ballroom, away from the responding security. Michael's mind mapped the building from memory. He'd worked here for 18 months, cleaned every floor, memorized every exit. There was a freight elevator 3 corridors over, used for maintenance and deliveries. If they could reach it before security locked down the entire building, they had a chance. Behind them, boots pounded against linoleum. Voices shouted commands. The building's alarm system continued its electronic shrieking, punctuated now by the deeper tones of emergency lockdown protocols activating. "Who were those men?" Evelyn asked as they ran, her bare feet silent on the wet floor. She'd lost her heels in the struggle. "Why did they want me dead?" "You testified against the Centurion Group last month. You exposed their security vulnerabilities, cost them a $3 billion defense contract." Michael checked a corner before guiding her through it, his movements controlled despite their speed. "Someone in that organization decided retribution was worth the risk." "How do you know about Centurion?" "I read newspapers." "Janitors don't execute tactical rescues like that. Janitors don't know Marcus Webb's military record. Janitors don't—" She grabbed his arm, forcing him to stop, to look at her. Water dripped from both of them onto the stark white floor. "Who are you really?" Michael Carter looked at Evelyn Zhao, and for just a moment the carefully constructed mask slipped. She saw something in his eyes that was older than his face suggested. harder than any janitor should possess, a darkness that came from places most people didn't survive. Someone who used to be someone else, he said. Someone who's trying very hard not to be that person anymore. Well, tonight you failed. Evelyn's voice was sharp, riding the edge of shock and adrenaline. Because whoever you were just came back. I know. Michael turned away, started moving again. Trust me, I know. They reached the freight elevator, and Michael used his maintenance keycard to call it. The doors opened with a hydraulic wheeze, revealing a scarred metal interior that smelled of motor oil and cardboard. They stepped inside, and Michael hit the button for the basement level, the only floor that connected to the underground parking garage. As the elevator descended, Evelyn studied the man who'd saved her life. Up close, she could see details that didn't fit the janitor narrative. The way he held himself, even now, suggested combat training. The scar on his jaw was too clean, too surgical. Not an accident, but probably shrapnel removal or field surgery. His hands were calloused from maintenance work, yes, but underneath that were older calluses, the kind that came from weapons handling and hard training. You have a daughter, she said suddenly, remembering the little girl on the balcony. Michael's jaw tightened. Sophie. She's 7. She's in the bathroom by the fire alarm station. She's safe. How do you know? Because I taught her to follow instructions in emergencies. Because that bathroom door is solid steel with a deadbolt installed to code after 9/11. Because I've planned for this scenario more times than I want to count. His voice was flat, stating facts, but underneath was something raw and afraid. Because she has to be safe. She's all I have left. The elevator shuddered to a stop at the basement level. The doors opened onto a dimly lit parking garage that stretched away into shadows, concrete pillars supporting the weight of 40 floors of luxury above them. Michael led Evelyn out, moving quickly between parked cars toward the exit ramp. That's when the lights hit them, brilliant and blinding, mounted on vehicles that had blocked the garage exit. Michael raised a hand against the glare, and loudspeakers crackled to life. This is the Boston Police Department. Drop your weapon and place your hands on your head. Do it now! Michael looked at the gun still in his hand, Marcus Webb's Glock, now a murder weapon covered in his prints. He looked at Evelyn Zhao besinging him, alive because of what he'd done. He looked at the half-dozen police vehicles blocking their escape, at the SWAT team taking positions with rifles trained on his center mass. He dropped the gun. It clattered against concrete, impossibly loud in the sudden silence. His hands went up slowly, fingers spread, showing he was compliant, showing he was done. Ms. Zhao, he said quietly, not taking his eyes off the police, when they ask you what happened tonight, tell them the truth. All of it. What are you? Tell them you were attacked by 3 men. Tell them a janitor named Michael Carter stopped them. Tell them to check his background, his records, his history. Michael's voice was steady, but there was resignation in it. The sound of someone who'd known this moment would come eventually. Tell them to ask the FBI about Phantom. Evelyn's eyes went wide. Phantom? The Phantom? On your knees, now! The police weren't interested in conversation. Michael knelt slowly, his hands still raised, and Evelyn watched as a dozen officers swarmed him. They moved with aggressive efficiency, hands wrenching his arms down, zip ties cutting into his wrists, knees pressing into his back to keep him prone. Someone read him his rights in a rapid monotone, the Miranda warning delivered like a grocery list. Through it all, Michael Carter's expression never changed. He simply endured, his gray-green eyes fixed on some distant point, waiting for this storm to pass like he'd waited through so many others. Wait! Stop! Evelyn found her voice, stepped forward despite an officer trying to hold her back. He saved my life. Those men upstairs were trying to kill me, and he stopped them. Ma'am, please step back. We'll take your statement shortly. You don't understand. He's not the threat. He's... But Marcus Hayes had arrived now, running down the exit ramp with his security team. He saw Evelyn, saw the man in custody, and his face went through a complicated series of expressions. Ms. Zhao, are you injured? No, but this man saved me. You need to... I have 3 dead bodies in my service corridor and a ballroom full of traumatized civilians. Saved you or not, he's got a lot of explaining to do. Hayes looked at the officers. Where are you taking him? Central booking, then probably holding pending investigation. I want to be notified immediately when the FBI arrives. Hayes pulled out his phone, already dialing. And they will arrive, trust me on that. Because Marcus Hayes had been in security long enough to recognize certain things. The way that Janitor had moved, that wasn't amateur self-defense training from a weekend course. Those were precision kills executed by someone with extensive military experience. And the name Evelyn Zhao had mentioned, Phantom, that rang distant bells. Old operation names whispered in the kind of briefings Hayes used to attend when he worked presidential security. If this janitor was really who Evelyn thought he was, then tonight had just become exponentially more complicated. Michael was loaded into a police van, still silent, still compliant. As the doors closed, he looked back one last time at Sterling Tower rising into the night sky, water still streaming from broken sprinklers, fire alarms still ringing, and somewhere 40 floors up, his daughter was waiting for him to come back. He'd promised her pizza. That promise felt very far away now. The van pulled away from the garage, lights flashing, and Evelyn Zhao stood in the basement of her own gala, barefoot and soaking wet, watching the man who'd saved her life disappear into the legal system. Around her, police and security swarmed, processing the scene, interviewing witnesses, trying to understand what had happened. But Evelyn already understood one thing with crystal clarity. The humble janitor who'd knelt on a balcony polishing brass while his daughter read books about dragons wasn't humble at all. He was a ghost wearing skin, a weapon that had hidden itself in plain sight for years. And tonight, someone had forced that weapon back into the light. The question now was why? Why had Marcus Webb and his team targeted her so aggressively? Why had they been willing to hit her in such a public place, surrounded by witnesses and security? The Centurion group was ruthless, yes, but they were also professional. This kind of brazen attack wasn't their style. Unless they were desperate, unless whatever Evelyn knew, whatever she'd testified about, was more dangerous than she'd realized. Unless someone had decided that killing her was worth any risk, any exposure, any consequence. Evelyn pulled out her phone, miraculously still functional despite the water, and dialed her FBI contact. He answered on the second ring, his voice thick with sleep. "Zhao, it's 2 a.m. This better be..." "I was just attacked at the Sterling Tower Gala by 3 men led by Marcus Webb, former Delta Force, current mercenary. They're dead now, killed by someone who I think used to be military or intelligence. He called himself Michael Carter, but he told me to tell you to ask about Phantom." Evelyn spoke quickly, precisely, while the details were still sharp. "I need you to find out everything about both situations, and I need it yesterday." Silence on the other end. Then, "Phantom? As in the Phantom? That's impossible. He died 8 years ago in Afghanistan." Apparently, rumors of his death were exaggerated. He's currently being taken to central booking by Boston PD, and Agent Morrison, if he disappears into the system or something happens to him before you get there, I'm going to consider that a problem. Evelyn, slow down. You're telling me that a dead special operations legend just saved your life while working as a janitor? That's exactly what I'm telling you. And I'm telling you that whatever reason Marcus Webb had for trying to kill me tonight, it's bigger than my congressional testimony. Someone is scared enough of what I know to risk everything. I need protection. I need answers. And I need you to make sure that Michael Carter and his daughter are safe. Do you understand me? Agent Morrison understood. He'd worked with Evelyn Zhao long enough to know that when she used that tone, the situation was real and the threats were credible. I'll have a team at your location in 20 minutes. Don't talk to anyone else until we arrive. And Evelyn, if that janitor really is Phantom, then we're all in deeper than you realize. That name came attached to operations so black they didn't have file numbers. If he's alive, there are people who won't be happy about it. The call ended, and Evelyn looked around the parking garage, at the police tape, the evidence markers, the blood trail leading back to the elevator. 40 floors above, her gala was ruined. Her reputation would take a hit from the violence that had erupted at her event. The media would have a field day. She didn't care about any of it. She cared about the man who'd stepped out of invisibility to save her life, who'd killed 3 trained operators with surgical precision and then surrendered peacefully because he had a daughter waiting for him. She cared about understanding who he really was, what he'd done, and why he'd been hiding. Most of all, she cared about making sure that whoever had sent Marcus Webb would answer for it. Evelyn Zhao had built her company on the principle that security meant more than firewalls and encryption. It meant identifying threats before they materialized, understanding enemies before they struck, and protecting assets before they knew they needed protection. Tonight, she'd been the asset. She'd failed to see the threat, but she was still alive, and that gave her a chance to learn from her mistakes. The FBI arrived exactly 19 minutes later, 3 black SUVs with government plates and men in suits that screamed federal authority. Agent Morrison emerged from the lead vehicle, his expression grim, and walked directly to Evelyn. "Tell me everything," he said. So she did. She told him about recognizing the 3 men in the ballroom, about Marcus Webb's cold threats, about the janitor who'd become something else entirely. She described the precision of the kills, the tactical awareness, the way Michael Carter had moved like violence was his first language, and everything else was just translation. Morrison listened without interrupting, his face growing more concerned with each detail. When she finished, he made a phone call that consisted of exactly 7 words. "We need to activate Protocol Lazarus." He hung up and looked at Evelyn. "You're being moved to a safe house effective immediately. Your company will be informed that you're handling personal matters and will be unavailable. Your security clearance is being temporarily elevated, and you'll be debriefed by people with clearances higher than mine." "What about Michael Carter?" "Michael Carter doesn't exist. Not in the way you think he does. If he's really Phantom, then that man's entire life is a construct built on top of a ghost. Everything about him, his identity, his background, his records, all of it is cover." Morrison gestured to the SUVs. "Come with me. We're going to sort this out, but not here, not now, and not in front of Boston PD." "His daughter," Evelyn said suddenly. "There's a 7-year-old girl still in the building, Sophie Carter. She's locked in a bathroom on the balcony level. Someone needs to get her, make sure she's safe." Morrison's expression softened slightly. "We'll handle it. The girl will be cared for. But Evelyn, you need to understand something. If Phantom is alive, if he's been living under an alias for 8 years, then there are very specific reasons why. Reasons that probably involve threats to national security, compromised operations, or enemies that don't forget. Bringing him back into the light might protect you tonight, but it might also start a chain reaction we can't control. Then we'll control it together." Evelyn climbed into the SUV, her wet dress clinging to her frame, her bare feet leaving damp prints on the leather seats. "Because whoever tried to kill me tonight, they're not going to stop. And I'd rather face that threat with a ghost on my side than hide and hope they miss next time." The SUVs pulled away from Sterling Tower, sirens silent but lights flashing, cutting through Boston traffic with federal authority. Behind them, the building still blazed with emergency lighting, still crawled with police and security, still held the aftermath of violence that would take weeks to fully process. On the balcony level, locked in a bathroom with industrial cleaner smell and fluorescent lights, Sophie Carter sat against the wall, her dragon book clutched to her chest, waiting for her father to come back like he'd promised. She'd heard the alarm bells. She'd heard the shouting. She'd heard sounds that might have been firecrackers but probably weren't. Sophie Carter was 7 years old, but she wasn't stupid. She knew her father wasn't just a janitor. She knew because sometimes late at night when he thought she was sleeping, she'd seen him doing exercises that normal dads didn't do, moving through their small apartment with a speed and silence that seemed impossible for someone his size. She knew because sometimes he had nightmares that made him wake up gasping, reaching for weapons that weren't there. She knew because once, when a man had grabbed her arm too roughly at the playground, her father had appeared so fast and with such intensity that the man had released her and apologized without being asked. Her father was a secret pretending to be ordinary, and tonight the secret had come out. Sophie waited, patient as only children raised by single parents can be, trusting that her father would keep his promise because he always kept his promises. She waited while police and security searched the building. She waited while investigators photographed evidence and interviewed witnesses. She waited while the world above and below the bathroom door moved in chaos and confusion. Then she heard the knock, soft, rhythmic, exactly like her father had taught her. "Sophie?" "Sweetheart, it's Agent Morrison with the FBI. Your dad asked me to come get you. He's okay, but he can't come back right now. Can you unlock the door for me?" Sophie didn't move. She remembered her father's rules. Never open the door unless you hear our signal. Never trust anyone unless they know the code. "What's his favorite color?" she called through the door. Silence. Then, "Trick question. He doesn't have one. He says favorites are arbitrary and tactical awareness is more important than aesthetic preferences." Sophie unlocked the door. Agent Morrison stood in the hallway, his FBI credentials visible, his expression a mixture of professional concern and genuine kindness. Behind him were two female agents, both smiling in that careful way adults smiled when they were trying not to scare children. "Hi, Sophie, I'm Tom. Your dad really did ask me to make sure you're safe. Do you know what happened tonight?" Sophie nodded. She was 7, not stupid. "Bad people tried to hurt someone, and Daddy stopped them." "That's right. Your dad did something very brave, but now we need to make sure you're somewhere safe while we figure everything out. Are you okay with coming with us?" "Where's Daddy?" Tom Morrison knelt down to her level, and Sophie appreciated that. Adults who knelt down were usually telling the truth. "Your dad is with the police right now. He's not in trouble. Well, he's sort of in trouble, but not the bad kind of trouble. More like the complicated kind. But I promise you, we're going to make sure he's safe and that you two see each other again soon. Can you trust me on that?" Sophie looked at him with gray-green eyes that were far too old for her face, eyes that had learned to read people from watching her father navigate a world that didn't always make sense. She saw sincerity in Agent Morrison's expression, saw concern that seemed genuine, saw the kind of person her father might trust if he had to trust anyone. "Okay," she said, "but we were supposed to get pizza, pepperoni, and mushrooms." "Then that's what we'll get. I know a place that's still open." Tom Morrison held out his hand, and Sophie took it, her small fingers disappearing into his grip. As they walked through Sterling Tower toward the exit, past police tape and evidence markers and rooms still dripping with sprinkler water, Sophie Carter carried her dragon book and thought about her father. She'd known he was a secret, but she'd never known he was a hero. Maybe they were the same thing, just seen from different angles. Across the city, in a holding cell at Boston Police Headquarters, Michael Carter sat on a metal bench bolted to the concrete wall and waited for the storm to break. They'd taken his wallet, his keys, his shoelaces. They'd photographed him, fingerprinted him, run his information through every database they had access to. What they'd found had made them very nervous. Michael Carter had a social security number, a driver's license, and employment history going back 8 years. He had an apartment lease in Dorchester, a checking account at a local credit union, tax returns filed on time. He existed on paper with perfect documentation, but none of it was real. The social security number traced back to a child who died in 1997. The employment history had references that checked out but never quite felt completely authentic. The apartment lease was paid from a bank account funded by sources that, if anyone looked deep enough, vanished into the kind of black budgets that didn't have congressional oversight. Michael Carter was a construct, a fiction maintained by people who had reasons to keep that fiction alive. And now, because he'd chosen to save a life instead of maintaining his cover, that entire carefully built illusion was crumbling. The holding cell door opened and 2 men in suits entered. Not police, federal. One was younger, mid-30s, with the kind of rigid posture that suggested military background. The other was older, 60 or more, with silver hair and the expression of someone who'd seen everything and was impressed by none of it. "Captain Cross," the older man said, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "Or do you prefer Phantom, or maybe just Michael these days?" Michael looked up, his face carefully neutral. "I prefer to be with my daughter." "Your daughter is safe. She's being cared for by people who understand the situation. You have my word on that." The older man pulled a chair from the corner and sat down, ignoring the younger agent's look of disapproval. "I'm Director Walsh, Defense Intelligence Agency. This is Agent Chen. We have a problem." "Several, I'd imagine." "You're supposed to be dead. You've been legally deceased for 8 years, Captain. Your funeral was attended by 200 people, including the Secretary of Defense. Your name is on a memorial wall at Fort Bragg. Your daughter receives survivor benefits from a trust fund set up by people who believed her father died serving his country." Walsh leaned forward, his expression hard. "Tonight, you killed 3 men in front of witnesses, including a prominent CEO who is now very interested in who you really are. You've violated your cover, exposed classified operations, and created an intelligence nightmare that is going to take months to clean up. Would you like to explain to me what the hell you were thinking? Michael met his gaze without flinching. I was thinking that Evelyn Zhao was about to be executed by Marcus Webb and two operators from the Centurion Group. I was thinking that her death would have compromised critical infrastructure security at a time when we can't afford that kind of vulnerability. I was thinking that I had the skills to prevent it and approximately 3 seconds to make a decision. He paused. I was thinking that some things matter more than cover identities. Noble, stupid, but noble. Walsh sighed, suddenly looking older. Captain Cross, do you know why you were declared dead 8 years ago? I was hit by an IED outside Kandahar, took shrapnel to the chest and head. I was evacuated to Landstuhl, then Walter Reed. The damage was severe enough that I was done as an operator. Someone high up decided it was easier to bury me than explain why their most effective asset was suddenly useless. That's the story we told. Here's the truth. Walsh pulled out a file, set it on the table between them. You were hit by that IED, yes, but the reason you were declared dead wasn't your injuries. It was because during your last operation before the blast, you discovered something. You found evidence that a private military contractor, later identified as the Centurion Group, was selling American intelligence to hostile actors. You compiled a report, sent it through proper channels, and 48 hours later, someone tried very hard to make sure you didn't survive to testify. Michael's expression didn't change, but something cold moved behind his eyes. The IED wasn't an accident. The IED was a targeted hit, disguised as an accident. You should have died. The fact that you didn't was due to luck and the medic who happened to be close enough to stop you from bleeding out. Walsh tapped the file. We faked your death because we needed time to investigate without tipping off whoever had tried to kill you. We created Michael Carter as a cover identity, set you up with a new life, and buried the truth so deep that even most people in the intelligence community believe you're gone. And my daughter? Michael's voice was quiet, dangerous. Did you tell her the truth, or did you let her believe her father was dead? Your daughter was 3 years old, Captain. We told her what a 3-year-old needed to hear, that her daddy was hurt but would be okay. As she got older, we maintained the fiction that you'd been medically discharged and were recovering. It wasn't perfect, but it kept her safe, and it kept you alive. Walsh's expression softened slightly. I know it's not what you wanted, but it was the best option we had at the time. Michael absorbed this, his jaw working. 8 years. 8 years of hiding, of pretending, of being someone other than who he was. 8 years of watching his daughter grow up with a father who flinched at loud noises and couldn't explain why he knew how to disable a man in 6 different ways. 8 years of peace bought with lies and maintained with constant vigilance. And now it was over. What happens now? He asked. That depends on you, Captain Cross, or Michael Carter, or Phantom. Honestly, I'm not sure which identity we're even talking to right now. Walsh stood, walked to the cell door, and turned back. Your cover is blown. Evelyn Zhao knows who you are, or at least suspects. The FBI is asking questions. Boston PD is very confused about why we're intervening in what should be a straightforward self-defense case. And most problematic, if Marcus Webb and his team were sent by Centurion to kill Ms. Zhao, then someone in that organization knows she's connected to you now, which means your daughter is potentially at risk. Michael stood, his hands clenched at his sides. If anyone touches Sophie, no one is going to touch Sophie. We'll make sure of that. But Captain, you need to understand the situation. You can't go back to being just a janitor. That life is over. The question now is what life replaces it. Walsh opened the door, stepped into the hallway, and looked back. Get some rest. Tomorrow, we're going to have a very long conversation about your future, Ms. Zhao's security, and exactly what the Centurion Group is trying so hard to prevent from coming to light. Because one thing is clear, tonight wasn't just about killing a CEO. It was about silencing someone who knows something worth dying to protect. The door closed, leaving Michael alone in the holding cell with his thoughts and the ruins of his carefully constructed normal life. He thought about Sophie, eating pizza with FBI agents, probably asking them 1,000 questions in that precocious way of hers. He thought about Evelyn Zhao, soaking wet and barefoot, watching him surrender to police. He thought about Marcus Webb's last words. Who the hell are you? 8 years ago, he'd been Phantom, the ghost who completed impossible missions and left no trace. Then he'd been Michael Carter, the janitor who polished floors and picked up his daughter from school. Tonight, in the space of 4 seconds in a service corridor, he'd become something he'd hoped to never be again, a weapon aimed at protecting what mattered most. Maybe that was his truth. Maybe beneath all the identities and cover stories, he was simply a man who couldn't stand by when people needed help, even if helping meant revealing everything he'd hidden. Michael lay down on the metal bench, his eyes fixed on the ceiling, and waited for dawn. Tomorrow would bring answers. Tonight brought only the weight of choices made and the knowledge that peace, once broken, was nearly impossible to repair. But his daughter was safe. Evelyn Zhao was alive. And Marcus Webb would never threaten anyone again. In the currency of decisions, that would have to be enough. Dawn broke over Boston with the kind of gray light that made the city look washed out and tired. Michael hadn't slept. He'd spent the night counting ceiling tiles and listening to the sounds of a police station waking up. Boots on linoleum, coffee makers gurgling, voices discussing shift changes and overtime. Normal sounds for people living normal lives. He wondered if he'd ever have that kind of normal again. The cell door opened at 7:15 and Director Walsh returned with Agent Chen and a third person Michael recognized immediately. Colonel Sarah Hendricks had been his commanding officer during his last 3 years as Phantom. She was 50 now, her dark hair showing gray at the temples, but her posture still carried that ramrod-straight military bearing that suggested she could outmarch soldiers half her age. Captain Cross. Her voice was clipped, professional, but there was something softer underneath. It's been a long time. Colonel? Michael stood, uncertain of the protocol. Did you salute a commanding officer when you were legally dead and standing in a holding cell? I didn't expect to see you here. I didn't expect to learn that one of my best operators had been alive for 8 years without anyone telling me. Hendricks glanced at Walsh with an expression that suggested they'd already had this conversation and it hadn't been pleasant. But apparently Need to Know didn't include me. Director Walsh has been explaining the situation. I have thoughts. I'm sure you do, Colonel. Walsh gestured to the hallway. Shall we continue this discussion somewhere more private? Captain Cross, you're being released into DIA custody pending resolution of this situation. Boston PD has been persuaded to let us handle it. They moved through the police station, drawing stares from officers who'd probably heard rumors about the janitor who killed 3 men with professional precision. Michael ignored the attention. He'd learned a long time ago that being invisible wasn't about hiding. It was about making people look past you even when you were standing right in front of them. That skill had kept him alive through 12 years of operations in places that weren't supposed to exist. A black SUV waited outside, engine running, windows tinted dark enough to be illegal in most states. Michael climbed into the back seat between Chen and Hendricks, while Walsh took the front passenger position. The driver pulled into morning traffic without a word, heading toward the waterfront. Where's my daughter? Michael's first words weren't a question about his own situation. They never would be. Safe house in Newton. Hendricks pulled out a tablet, showed him a photo. Sophie was asleep on a couch, a blanket tucked around her, her dragon book on the floor beside her. She had pizza, asked approximately 300 questions about what you do for work, and finally fell asleep around midnight. Agent Morrison says she's handling it better than most adults would. Michael stared at the photo, his jaw tight. She looked so small, so vulnerable. Everything he'd done for the past 8 years had been about keeping her from exactly this kind of situation, surrounded by federal agents, caught up in the dangerous machinery of his past. He'd failed. I want to see her. You will. But first we need to understand what happened last night and what it means going forward. Walsh turned in his seat to face Michael. Let's start with Marcus Webb. How did you recognize him? I didn't. Not immediately. I recognized the tactical pattern. 3 operators creating a perimeter around a target. Once I saw their movement, I knew what they were planning. When I got close enough to hear him speak, his voice triggered memory. We crossed paths in Afghanistan, briefly. He was Delta Force then, running interdiction operations near the Pakistan border. There were rumors even back then that he was taking payment from contractors for intelligence. Those rumors were accurate. Chen opened a file on his own tablet, scrolled through documents. Marcus Webb was dishonorably discharged in 2019 after an investigation proved he'd been selling classified tactical information to a Chinese intelligence front company. He went underground after that, surfaced a few times working as a mercenary for various groups. Last confirmed sighting was 6 months ago in Yemen, working security for an oil consortium. And now he's dead in Boston, trying to kill a tech CEO. Hendricks looked at Michael. Did he recognize you? No, why would he? Phantom died 8 years ago. He saw a janitor who got lucky. You don't get that lucky, Captain. What you did in that corridor was expert-level close-quarters combat. 3 armed operators neutralized in under 10 seconds. That's not luck. That's muscle memory from thousands of hours of training. Hendricks leaned forward, her expression intense. Which raises the question, what have you been doing for the past 8 years? Because janitors don't maintain that level of operational readiness by accident. Michael looked out the window at Boston passing by. Early morning joggers, coffee shops opening, delivery trucks making their rounds. Normal people doing normal things, unaware that the world they inhabited was held together by people like him who operated in the shadows. I trained, he said quietly. Every night after Sophie went to sleep, I trained. Not because I thought I'd need it, because I was afraid of what would happen if I let it slip away completely. The skills, the reflexes, the awareness, they're part of who I am. I couldn't just turn them off, even when I wanted to. You wanted to? Walsh's question was gentle, probing. Every single day. Do you know what it's like to be that good at violence? To know that you could end someone's life in half a dozen ways before they even realized you were a threat? It's not a gift, Director Walsh. It's a burden. And I wanted nothing more than to be free of it, to be just a father raising his daughter in peace. Michael's voice was steady, but there was pain underneath. But I couldn't let it go completely, because some part of me knew that one day someone from my past would find me, or someone would need me, or the world would stop being safe enough for me to pretend I was harmless. The SUV turned onto a side street, pulling into an underground parking garage beneath a building that didn't advertise what it housed. They took an elevator to the 4th floor, emerged into a space that looked like a corporate office, but felt like a military command center. Conference room, computer workstations, walls lined with monitors showing news feeds from around the world. A woman stood by the window, silhouetted against the morning light. She turned as they entered, and Michael felt something in his chest tighten. Evelyn Zhao looked different in daylight, wearing borrowed FBI clothing, dark slacks, and a white button-down that didn't quite fit. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and without the gala makeup, she looked younger and somehow more dangerous. Her dark eyes locked on Michael with an intensity that suggested she'd spent the night thinking about exactly what questions to ask him. Mr. Carter, her voice was cool, controlled. Or should I call you Captain Cross, or Phantom? I'm unclear on the proper protocol for addressing ghosts. Michael is fine. Michael. She walked toward him, and he noticed she was still barefoot. The FBI had provided clothes, but apparently not shoes. The man who saved my life last night. The man who killed 3 people with a precision that would impress Special Forces operators. The man who worked in my building for 18 months, cleaning floors and emptying trash, while being one of the most dangerous people in the country. She stopped 3 feet away, studying him like he was a puzzle she was determined to solve. Who are you really? Director Walsh intervened before Michael could answer. Ms. Zhao, perhaps we should all sit down. This is going to take some time to explain. They arranged themselves around a conference table, Walsh and Chen on one side, Hendricks beside them, Michael and Evelyn on the other. Someone had brought coffee and pastries, the kind of gesture toward normalcy that felt absurd given the circumstances. Michael ignored the food. Evelyn picked at a croissant without eating it. Walsh cleared his throat and began. Ms. Zhao, what I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest level. You're being read into this information because your life is at risk, and you deserve to understand why. But I need your agreement that nothing discussed here leaves this room without explicit authorization. Agreed. Evelyn's response was immediate. She ran a company that protected classified information. She understood operational security.
Good. Then let me tell you about Phantom. Walsh pulled up a file on the conference room's main screen. A photo appeared. Michael Carter, 8 years younger, harder, wearing military fatigues with no identifying insignia. Captain Michael Cross, Army Special Operations, recruited into a joint task force in 2012 that ran deep penetration missions in hostile territory. His specialty was what we called precision intervention, getting into impossible places, completing objectives that officially never happened, and getting out without leaving evidence. He was extraordinarily good at it. More photos appeared. Michael in various locations, desert terrain, urban environments, jungle. Always the same expression, focused, controlled, lethal. Evelyn studied each image, seeing the man who'd saved her life, but also something more. Something that made her understand why people had called him Phantom. Captain Cross ran 47 successful operations over 6 years. Hendricks took over the narrative, her tone carrying professional respect. 0 mission failures, 0 compromised operations, 0 friendly casualties under his command. He was the asset we deployed when everything else had failed, and he never disappointed us. Until Afghanistan, Chen pulled up a different file. 2017, Captain Cross was conducting surveillance on a private military contractor suspected of selling intelligence to hostile actors. He compiled evidence, sent it through proper channels, and 48 hours later, an IED hit his convoy. 3 soldiers died. Captain Cross survived, but with injuries that should have killed him. The screen showed medical reports, X-rays showing shrapnel damage, surgical notes detailing the extensive repairs needed to keep him alive. Evelyn read them with growing horror, understanding just how close Michael had come to death. We believed at the time that the IED was bad luck, wrong place, wrong time, but as we investigated, we realized it was a targeted hit. Someone had known Captain Cross's route, known his timing, and planted that explosive specifically to kill him. Walsh's expression was grim. We couldn't prove who ordered it without exposing our entire investigation into the contractors. So we made a decision. We declared Captain Cross dead, created a new identity for him, and gave him a life outside the military. It was supposed to be temporary, just until we could prosecute the people responsible. But Evelyn sensed there was more. But the investigation got complicated. The contractors had connections that went higher than we anticipated. People in Congress, people in the Pentagon, people who could make evidence disappear and witnesses change their stories. We were fighting a war on multiple fronts, and Captain Cross was safer dead than alive. So the temporary solution became permanent. Walsh looked at Michael. We checked in periodically, made sure he and his daughter were secure, but we left him alone. We thought that was the kindest option. It was. Michael spoke for the first time since they'd sat down. His voice was quiet, but firm. You gave me 8 years of peace, Director Walsh. 8 years of being a father without looking over my shoulder constantly. 8 years of Sophie growing up in relative normalcy. I'm not ungrateful for that. But last night you threw it all away. Chen's tone wasn't accusatory, just stating facts. You exposed yourself to save Ms. Zhao. Why? Michael looked at Evelyn, and she saw something in his expression that made her chest tighten. Not attraction, not romance. Something more fundamental. Recognition. The look of one person seeing another clearly, understanding their value, acknowledging their worth. Because she matters, Michael said simply. Because Zhao Systems protects critical infrastructure that keeps this country running. Because her testimony exposed corruption that needed exposing. Because she has value beyond her own life, and letting her die would have been wrong. He paused. And because I couldn't stand by and watch someone be murdered when I had the ability to prevent it. Call it training, call it instinct, call it whatever you want, but I couldn't do nothing. Evelyn found herself blinking back unexpected emotion. She'd spent her entire adult life building a company, proving her worth through work and achievement. People respected her success, her intelligence, her business acumen. But this man, this ghost wearing a janitor's uniform, had seen her as someone worth dying for, worth exposing 8 years of carefully maintained cover for, worth everything. Thank you, she said softly. I don't know if that's adequate, but thank you. Michael nodded, then turned back to Walsh.
So what now? I assume Marcus Webb didn't act alone. Someone hired him, someone gave him resources and intelligence. The Centurion Group is the obvious candidate, but they wouldn't risk this kind of exposure for simple revenge. There's something bigger happening. That's why you're here. Hendricks pulled up a new file, this one marked with security classifications that made Evelyn's eyes widen. 6 months ago, Zhao Systems discovered a vulnerability in the software used by the Department of Defense for logistics coordination. Ms. Zhao reported it, testified about it, and recommended a complete system overhaul. The Centurion Group, which had the contract for that software, lost billions when the government canceled the deal. I know all this. Evelyn frowned. But it was legitimate. Their software had backdoors that could have allowed hostile actors to disrupt military supply chains. It was dangerous, and they knew it was dangerous. My testimony was just about the technical facts. Your testimony was about more than that, even if you didn't realize it. Chen pulled up internal memos, emails, documents that Evelyn had never seen. While investigating the software vulnerabilities, we discovered that the Centurion Group wasn't just negligent, they were complicit. They'd intentionally left those back doors open because they were selling access to them, to the Chinese, to the Russians, to anyone willing to pay. Evelyn felt the blood drain from her face. That's treason. That's Tuesday for the Centurion Group, apparently. Walsh's tone was bitter. They've been playing both sides for years, taking government contracts while selling our secrets to adversaries. Your testimony gave us the opening we needed to start dismantling their operation. But it also made you a target. They can't let you live if it means their entire conspiracy gets exposed. So Marcus Webb was just the first attempt. Michael's statement wasn't a question. He was thinking tactically now, his mind working through scenarios. They'll try again, different method, different operators, but they won't stop until either Evelyn is dead or they are. Correct. Hendricks looked at them both. Which brings us to the purpose of this meeting. Ms. Zhao needs protection, not the kind of protection she had at that gala, visible security that can be planned around. She needs someone who can think like the enemy, anticipate threats before they materialize, and respond with overwhelming force when necessary. She needs someone who's done this kind of work before. Michael understood where this was going before Hendricks finished speaking. He shook his head. No, absolutely not. I have a daughter. I can't go back to that life. We're not asking you to go back to your old life, Captain. Walsh leaned forward. We're asking you to start a new one. Come work for Zhao Systems as head of corporate security. It's a legitimate position, good salary, normal working hours. But underneath that cover, you'll be protecting Ms. Zhao from threats that regular security can't handle. You'll have access to intelligence resources, tactical support, and most importantly, you'll have legitimacy. You won't be hiding anymore. You'll be visible, employed, exactly what you appear to be. Except I'll also be bait. Michael's voice was flat. You're hoping that the Centurion Group will come after Evelyn again, and when they do, you'll use me to draw them out. You'll use us both as bait. We'll use you both as an opportunity, Chen corrected. The Centurion Group has been untouchable because they operate in the shadows. But if they try to hit you, if they expose themselves in an attack, we'll have the evidence we need to bring them down completely. It's risky, yes, but it's also our best chance to end this before more people die. Evelyn had been quiet, processing everything she'd heard. Now she spoke, her voice steady despite the fear she must be feeling. You're asking Michael to risk his life and his daughter's safety to protect me and catch criminals who might kill us both. That's not a job offer. That's a suicide mission with benefits. It's a calculated risk with extensive support. Walsh pulled up organizational charts showing the resources that would be available. Sophie would be in protective custody, guarded 24/7 by people I trust personally. You'd both have access to secure communications, emergency extraction protocols, and tactical backup whenever needed. You wouldn't be alone in this. We'd be targets with excellent benefits. Michael stood, paced to the window, looked out at Boston waking up below. Somewhere in this city, his daughter was sleeping in a safe house, guarded by strangers, waiting for him to come back and explain why their life had suddenly become complicated. Somewhere in this city, people were planning to kill Evelyn Zhao because she'd had the courage to tell the truth. And somewhere in this city, he had a choice to make. He could say no.
walk away, take Sophie, disappear into another cover identity in another city. The DIA would help them vanish completely this time, bury them so deep that even the Centurion group couldn't find them. He could go back to being invisible, to being safe, to being a father who didn't have to explain why he knew 47 ways to kill someone with his bare hands. Or he could say yes, step back into the light, become the weapon he'd tried so hard to stop being, and use his skills to protect someone who'd done nothing wrong except refuse to be complicit in corruption. Tell me about her. Michael didn't turn from the window. Tell me about Evelyn Zhao. Not the CEO, not the tech genius. The person. Why should I risk my daughter's safety for her? The room went quiet. Evelyn stood slowly, walked to stand beside Michael at the window. She didn't touch him, but her presence was solid, real. I grew up in San Francisco, daughter of immigrants who worked 16-hour days running a restaurant in Chinatown. Her voice was soft, reflective. I learned to code because we couldn't afford video games, so I made my own. I went to Harvard on scholarships and student loans that I only finished paying off 3 years ago. I built my company because I believed that security mattered, that protecting people's information and infrastructure was worth dedicating my life to. And when I discovered that the Centurion Group was compromising national security for profit, I testified because it was the right thing to do, even though my lawyers told me it would make enemies I couldn't afford. She turned to look at Michael, and her eyes were fierce, uncompromising. I'm not special. I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who believes that truth matters more than comfort, and that standing up to corruption is worth the risk. But I'm also human, and I'm scared. Those men last night were going to kill me, and they would have succeeded if you hadn't stopped them. So if you're asking whether I'm worth protecting, I can't answer that. But I can tell you that I won't stop fighting the Centurion Group. I won't hide, I won't be silent, and I won't let them win, with your help or without it. Michael studied her reflection in the window glass. He saw determination there, and courage, and the kind of stubborn integrity that got people killed in his world. She reminded him of himself, years ago, before he'd learned that integrity was a luxury paid for in blood. Your daughter, Evelyn continued, Sophie, she's 7, right? What kind of world do you want her to grow up in? One where people like the Centurion Group can operate without consequences? One where telling the truth gets you murdered? Or one where people stand up against corruption, even when it's dangerous, even when it's easier to look away? She paused. You've been protecting her by hiding. Maybe it's time to protect her by fighting. Michael closed his eyes. She was right, and he hated that she was right. He'd spent 8 years teaching Sophie through his actions that safety came from invisibility, that surviving meant keeping your head down and avoiding attention. But what had that taught her, really? That the world was something to hide from rather than something to engage with? That danger was inevitable, and the best response was to run? That wasn't the lesson he wanted her to learn. He turned from the window, looked at the assembled intelligence officers, looked at Evelyn Zhao standing beside him with bare feet and borrowed clothes and more courage than most soldiers he'd known. I have conditions, he said. Walsh nodded. Name them. Sophie stays in protective custody only as long as absolutely necessary. I want her in a normal school, living a normal life, within 2 weeks. If this operation stretches longer than that, we reevaluate. Agreed. I want complete tactical autonomy in protecting Ms. Zhao. If I say we move, we move. If I say we stay, we stay. No second guessing, no committee decisions. My judgment is final. That's acceptable within reason, Hendricks interjected. But you'll report to me and I'll have oversight. You're not a lone operator anymore, Captain. You're part of a team. Michael nodded slowly. He could live with that. And I want the Centurion Group prosecuted when this is over. Not just disbanded, not just fined. I want every person who ordered Marcus Webb to kill Evelyn in prison or dead. That's non-negotiable. That's the goal. Walsh extended his hand. Do we have an agreement? Michael looked at the offered hand, looked at Evelyn, looked at the monitors showing a city full of people who had no idea how close they'd come to losing someone who protected them. He thought about Sophie sleeping in a safe house, waiting for her father to come back and tell her everything was okay. He shook Walsh's hand. We have an agreement. The next 2 hours were a blur of briefings and logistics. Michael was officially hired by Zhao Systems as Director of Corporate Security, a position that came with a salary that made his eyes widen and an office that was larger than his apartment. Evelyn signed off on the paperwork without hesitation, her expression suggesting she understood this was as much about creating cover as it was about actual employment. They were taken to a secure facility where Michael was outfitted with equipment that felt both familiar and foreign: a compact Sig Sauer P365, a tactical knife, body armor that could be worn under business clothes, and communications gear that looked like ordinary earbuds but connected him to DIA support networks. He checked each item methodically, muscle memory taking over, his hands remembering what his mind had tried to forget. Evelyn watched him work, saw the transformation from nervous father to operational professional. This was who Michael Cross had been before he became Michael Carter, someone who checked weapons with the casual competence of long practice, who wore body armor like a second skin, who moved through tactical preparation like most people move through their morning routines.
"You're different now," she observed. "Less uncertain. I'm in my element. Protecting people is what I was trained to do."
Michael checked the magazine on his Sig Sauer, loaded it, holstered the weapon at his hip. "Doesn't mean I'm happy about it, but at least I know what I'm doing." "And what are you doing exactly?" "Keeping you alive long enough to testify again." Michael looked at her directly. "Because Walsh was right about one thing. Your testimony is what gave them the opening to go after the Centurion Group. They'll need you to testify in more detail, to provide evidence in court proceedings, to be the face of their prosecution. Which means keeping you alive isn't just about protecting one person. It's about protecting the entire case against one of the most dangerous criminal organizations in the country." Evelyn felt the weight of that responsibility settle on her shoulders. She'd known her testimony was important, but she hadn't fully grasped how central she'd become to something much larger than herself. No pressure, then. "Welcome to my world." Michael's smile was brief, dark. Population, people who can't afford to fail. They were transported to Zhao Systems headquarters in Cambridge, a gleaming steel and glass building that looked like it had been designed by architects who believed in the future. Michael's new office was on the executive floor, 3 doors down from Evelyn's, with windows overlooking the Charles River and MIT beyond. It was surreal. 48 hours ago, he'd been emptying trash bins in this building. Now he had a corner office and access to security systems that monitored every entrance, every floor, every potential threat. Evelyn's assistant, Jennifer Park, met them in the lobby with an expression that suggested she'd spent the night processing trauma and drinking coffee in roughly equal measure. "Ms. Chow, thank God you're okay. We've been getting calls from everyone, the board, investors, media outlets. They all want statements about what happened. Tell them I'm fine and that we're cooperating with law enforcement. Nothing more specific until we have guidance from legal." Evelyn paused. "Jennifer, this is Michael Carter. He's our new director of corporate security." Jennifer looked at Michael, recognition dawning slowly. "The janitor. You were the one who... I'm the one who's going to make sure nothing like last night happens again." Michael's tone was professional, firm. "I'll need access to all security footage, employee records, visitor logs for the past 6 months. I'll also need to interview your entire security team and assess our current protocols. That's going to take time. Then we'd better start now." Michael gestured toward the elevators. "Ms. Zhao's life depends on having security that actually works. Let's make that happen." They rode the elevator to the Security Operations Center, a room filled with monitors and workstations where a team of 6 guards managed building access and surveillance. The head of the team was a man named Derek Wallace, ex-military police, competent but clearly out of his depth with the current situation. "Mr. Carter." Wallace stood, extended his hand. "I heard about what you did at Sterling Tower. That was impressive work." "It was necessary work." Michael shook his hand, assessed the room with a practiced eye. "Walk me through your current protocols. I want to understand what we're working with." For the next hour, Wallace explained their security setup: card access systems, cameras covering all public areas, guards stationed at main entrances. It was adequate for a normal corporate environment designed to handle theft and basic threats. It was woefully insufficient for protecting against the kind of attack the Centurion Group could mount. Michael made notes, asked questions,
pointed out vulnerabilities that made Wallace increasingly uncomfortable. The loading dock had blind spots. The parking garage wasn't monitored after hours. Employee credentials weren't regularly audited. There were a dozen ways a professional team could breach the building, and Michael knew them all because he'd exploited similar weaknesses in hostile facilities dozens of times. "We need to completely overhaul this system," Michael said finally. "Starting today. I want cameras covering every angle, including underground utilities access. I want biometric scanners at all entry points, not just card readers that can be cloned. I want a rotating guard schedule so patterns can't be predicted. And I want background checks run on every employee who has access to executive floors. That's going to cost... I don't care what it costs." Evelyn had appeared in the doorway, listening. "Mr. Carter's recommendations are approved."
"Whatever he needs, get it done." Wallace nodded, clearly understanding this wasn't a discussion. "Yes, ma'am. We'll start immediately." As they left the security center, Evelyn touched Michael's arm. "Was I too harsh? Overriding his concerns about budget?" "You were exactly right. This isn't about budget. It's about survival." Michael pulled out his phone, checked a message from Director Walsh. "And speaking of survival, we need to talk about your schedule. You have a board meeting tomorrow, a conference call with investors on Thursday, and you're supposed to speak at a tech summit in New York next week. All of that needs to be reconsidered." "I'm not going to hide in my office, Michael. I have responsibilities." "And I have a responsibility to keep you alive. Those two things need to find a balance." They walked toward her office, their footsteps echoing in the empty executive hallway. "The board meeting can be virtual. The investor call can be secured with proper protocols. But the New York summit, that's too exposed, too many variables. I recommend canceling." Evelyn stopped walking, turned to face him. "That summit is important. I'm receiving an award for innovation in cybersecurity. It's not just about me. It's about representing women in tech, about showing that speaking up against corruption doesn't mean your career ends. If I cancel, the Centurion Group wins. They've silenced me through fear." Michael understood her logic, but he also understood the reality of their situation. They haven't silenced you. They've tried to kill you. There's a difference. And that award ceremony is a perfect opportunity for them to try again. Large crowd, public venue, dozens of access points. It's a security nightmare. "Then make it secure. Isn't that what I'm paying you for?" Evelyn's expression was challenging, but there was something else underneath, a need to prove that she wouldn't be controlled by fear, that her life wouldn't be dictated by threats. Michael recognized that need. He'd felt it himself many times, the refusal to let danger define him. It was what had made him an effective operator. It was also what had nearly gotten him killed in Afghanistan. "I'll make it as secure as possible," he said finally, "but understand that as secure as possible still means risk, real risk, the kind that doesn't come with guarantees." "I understand." Evelyn met his gaze steadily. "But I won't live in fear. I can't. If the Centurion Group wants me dead, they'll have to work for it." Michael almost smiled. Almost. "Then let's make them work very hard." They spent the rest of the day planning, preparing, building the infrastructure that would keep Evelyn alive through what came next. Michael coordinated with Walsh's team on intelligence gathering, worked with Wallace on security improvements, and reached out to old contacts who owed him favors. By evening, they had the beginnings of a plan. Not perfect, but better than improvising under fire. At 7 o'clock, Michael's phone buzzed with a message from Agent Morrison. "Sophie's awake and asking for you. She's handling it well but needs to see you." Michael showed the message to Evelyn. "I need to go see my daughter. Will you be okay here for a few hours?" "I'll be fine. Director Walsh has agents in the building, and your security team is on alert. Go be with Sophie. She needs you more than I do right now." Evelyn hesitated, then added, "Tell her thank you for pulling that fire alarm. It probably saved lives." Michael nodded and left, driving through Cambridge evening traffic toward the Newton safe house. It was an ordinary suburban home on an ordinary suburban street, indistinguishable from its neighbors except for the armed federal agents positioned discreetly at every approach. Agent Morrison met him at the door. "She's in the living room. Fair warning, she has questions. A lot of questions." Michael entered to find Sophie sitting on the couch, her dragon book beside her, a half-eaten sandwich on the coffee table. She looked up when he came in, and her expression went through several rapid changes: relief, joy, uncertainty, and something that looked like betrayal. "Daddy." Her voice was small. "Hey, sweetheart." Michael sat beside her carefully, giving her space to process. "I'm sorry I couldn't come sooner. Things got complicated. Agent Morrison said you're a hero, that you saved someone's life." Sophie picked at the edge of her book's cover, not looking at him. "He said you used to be a soldier and that you're really good at protecting people." "That's true." "But you told me you were just a janitor." Now she did look at him, and her eyes were confused, hurt. "You lied to me." Michael felt that accusation like a physical blow. "I didn't lie exactly. I am a janitor, but I used to be a soldier, yes. And I didn't tell you because I wanted you to have a normal life. I wanted you to be safe." "Safe from what? How did you explain to a 7-year-old that the world contained people who would kill to protect their secrets? That her father had enemies who might hurt her just to hurt him? That safety was an illusion maintained through constant vigilance and careful deception? Safe from people who might want to hurt us because of things I did when I was a soldier. Bad people who don't like that I stopped them from hurting others." Michael reached out, tucked a strand of hair behind Sophie's ear. "Everything I've done, sweetheart, has been to protect you. Maybe I did it wrong. Maybe I should have told you the truth sooner, but I promise you, I've never lied about the important thing." "What's the important thing?" "That I love you more than anything in the world, that keeping you safe is the only thing that really matters to me. That no matter what happens, no matter what you learn about who I was or what I did, that part is always true." Michael's voice cracked slightly. "You're my whole world, Sophie. You're why I left the military. You're why I became a janitor. You're why I do everything I do." Sophie was quiet for a long moment, processing this. Then, "The lady you saved. Is she nice?" The sudden change in topic threw Michael off balance. "What?" "Ms. Zhao. Agent Morrison said she's important, that she helps protect computers or something. Is she nice?" "She's brave," Michael said carefully. "She told the truth about bad people, even though it was dangerous. And now those bad people want to hurt her, so I'm going to make sure they can't." "Like you protected me?" "Exactly like that." Sophie nodded slowly, seeming to accept this. "Are we going to live with agents forever? Because Agent Morrison is nice, but I miss our apartment, and my school, and my friends." "Not forever. Just until it's safe." Michael pulled her into a hug, felt her small arms wrap around his chest. "I promise, sweetheart. As soon as I can, I'll make sure you can go back to normal. Real normal, not the hiding kind." They sat like that for a while, father and daughter, holding on to each other in a safe house surrounded by armed guards, trying to find comfort in a world that had suddenly become much more complicated. Eventually, Sophie pulled back and picked up her dragon book. "Can you read to me? Like you always do?" So Michael read, his voice steady and calm, bringing dragons and adventures to life in a living room that smelled of government-issue furniture and stale coffee. He read until Sophie fell asleep against his shoulder, her breathing slow and peaceful, trusting him to keep the monsters away. Agent Morrison appeared in the doorway, gestured Michael into the kitchen. "We need to talk about long-term arrangements. She can't stay here indefinitely." "I know." Director Walsh said 2 weeks maximum. "We're thinking a private school with enhanced security. Somewhere she can have a normal routine while still being protected. There's a place in Brookline that's been used before for situations like this. Good academics, small class sizes, and they're discreet about students who need extra security." Morrison pulled up information on his phone. "We could have her enrolled by Monday." Michael looked at the photos of the school, bright classrooms, small playground, teachers who looked kind and professional. It seemed nice, normal even, but it was still a prison, just with better decorations. "Do it," he said, "but I visit every day, non-negotiable." "Of course. You're her father. We're protecting her, not keeping her from you." Morrison put his phone away. "For what it's worth, Captain, you're doing the right thing. The Centurion group needs to be stopped, and Ms. Zhao is key to making that happen. Your sacrifice." "Don't." Michael's voice was sharp. "Don't call it sacrifice. Sacrifice implies choice, implies nobility. This is just survival. I'm doing what I have to do to keep my daughter safe and fulfill an obligation to someone who needs help. It's not heroic, it's just necessary. Morrison nodded, accepting the rebuke. Understood. Your driver will take you back to Cambridge whenever you're ready. Michael returned to the living room, carefully extracted himself from Sophie's sleeping form, and tucked a blanket around her. He kissed her forehead, whispered, "I love you," and left before the weight of everything could crush him. The drive back to Zhao Systems gave him time to think, to plan, to prepare mentally for what came next. Tomorrow, Evelyn would have her virtual board meeting. Thursday, the investor call. And next week, the New York summit that he knew in his gut would be where the Centurion Group made their next move. They had time to prepare, but not much. Time to find vulnerabilities in their own security before the enemy found them first. Time to build a protective structure strong enough to withstand professionals who were very good at killing people. Michael had done this kind of work before, built protective details around high-value targets in hostile environments. But those targets had been military officials or intelligence assets, people who understood the risks and accepted them as part of their job. Evelyn Zhao was a civilian, brilliant and brave, but not trained for the world she'd been thrust into. His job was to keep her alive long enough to finish what she'd started, to make sure that when the Centurion Group came for her again, and they would come, he was ready. The car pulled up to Zhao Systems headquarters, now lit up against the night sky like a beacon. Michael climbed out, straightened his jacket that concealed his holstered Sig Sauer, and walked into the building that was simultaneously his workplace and his battlefield. Evelyn was still in her office, working at her computer, her bare feet tucked under her chair. She looked up when Michael knocked, and her expression softened slightly. "How's Sophie?" Confused, hurt that I didn't tell her the truth sooner, but she'll be okay. Kids are resilient. Michael entered the office, closed the door behind him. "We need to talk about New York." "I'm still going." "I know, which means we need a plan that accounts for every possible attack vector." Michael pulled up a chair, sat across from her desk. "The summit is at the Javits Center, right? Large venue, multiple entry points, thousands of attendees. We'll need advanced security sweeps, controlled access to your speaking area, and extraction protocols if things go wrong. We'll need to coordinate with NYPD, FBI, and private security. It's going to be complicated." Evelyn listened as Michael outlined the requirements, his voice falling into a rhythm that suggested he'd done this briefing many times before. He was different now than he'd been at the gala, more confident, more focused. This was someone who knew exactly what he was doing and how to do it well. "You're good at this," she observed. "Planning, protecting. It's not just training, is it? You actually care about keeping people safe." "It's the only thing I've ever been good at." Michael's admission was quiet, almost vulnerable. "Violence comes easy to me. Too easy. But using that violence to protect people who can't protect themselves, that gives it meaning. Makes it something other than just destruction." Evelyn studied him in the dim office light, this man who'd killed to save her and then surrendered peacefully because he had a daughter waiting for him. He was a contradiction, lethal and gentle, dangerous and protective, a weapon who chose who to aim himself at. "I'm glad you were at that gala," she said. "I'm glad you chose to help me, and I'm sorry that doing the right thing cost you your peace." "Peace is overrated." Michael stood, moved to the window, looked out at Boston at night. "I spent 8 years trying to be peaceful, trying to be normal. But every night, I dreamed about the work I used to do. Every morning, I woke up feeling like I was wasting skills that could help people. Maybe this is who I'm supposed to be. Maybe hiding was the lie, and this is the truth. Or maybe," Evelyn said gently, "you're both. The janitor and the soldier, the father and the protector. Maybe you don't have to choose." Michael didn't respond, but something in his posture suggested he was considering her words. They stood in comfortable silence, two people brought together by violence, trying to figure out how to survive what came next. Outside, the city continued its rhythm. Cars on streets, lights in windows, people living lives unaware of the battles fought in shadows to keep them safe. Somewhere in that city, the Centurion Group was planning their next move. Somewhere, enemies were gathering. But tonight, in this office, Evelyn Zhao was alive, and Michael Cross had a purpose beyond simply surviving. It would have to be enough. The week that followed moved with a strange duality, surface calm, masking constant tension, routine punctuated by moments of acute awareness that death could arrive at any second wearing any face. Michael established patterns designed to look predictable while actually being anything but. He arrived at Zhao Systems each morning at different times, using different routes, varying his routine enough that anyone trying to establish a pattern would find only chaos disguised as order. Evelyn's board meeting went smoothly, conducted via secure video conference from a room Michael had swept twice for surveillance devices. The investors' call on Thursday required similar precautions, and Michael stood outside the conference room door for 2 hours, watching, waiting, seeing threats in every delivery person and maintenance worker who passed through the building's corridors. Sophie started at her new school on Monday morning, and Michael drove her there himself, his eyes constantly scanning for vehicles that followed too closely or faces that appeared too frequently. She'd been quiet during the ride, clutching her dragon book like a talisman, and when they'd pulled up to the small private academy in Brookline, she'd looked at the armed security guard trying to appear casual near the entrance. "It's like I'm famous," she'd said softly, "but for bad reasons." Michael had knelt beside her car door, his hands on her shoulders. "You're not famous, sweetheart. You're protected. There's a difference, and it won't be forever. I promise." She'd nodded, kissed his cheek, and walked into the school with her head held high, 7 years old and already learning to navigate a world that wasn't fair, wasn't safe, wasn't anything like what childhood should be. Michael had watched until she disappeared inside, then sat in his car for 5 full minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel, fighting the urge to grab her and run somewhere the Centurion group could never find them. But running wouldn't solve anything. It would just postpone the inevitable confrontation, and next time he might not be fast enough, or skilled enough, or lucky enough to keep Sophie safe. Better to face the threat now, on ground he'd prepared, with resources backing him up. Better to finish what Evelyn had started before it consumed them all. On Friday afternoon, Director Walsh arrived at Zhao Systems with Agent Chen and a woman Michael didn't recognize. She was in her 40s, with sharp features and eyes that suggested she'd seen too much and forgotten nothing. Walsh made introductions in Michael's new office, which still smelled of fresh paint and hadn't yet accumulated the personal touches that made a space feel lived in. "Captain Cross, this is Rachel Vance. She's been investigating the Centurion Group for the past 18 months. She has information you need to hear before New York." Rachel Vance didn't waste time on pleasantries. She pulled out a tablet, called up files, and began speaking with the clipped efficiency of someone delivering a military briefing. The Centurion Group is more than a corrupt defense contractor. They're an intelligence operation masquerading as a business, founded 12 years ago by 3 former CIA officers who decided that patriotism was less profitable than pragmatism. They took everything they'd learned about running covert operations and applied it to the private sector. Michael leaned forward, his attention absolute. "Who are the founders?" "David Reeves, former Deputy Director of Operations at Langley. Margaret Chen, former head of the Directorate of Science and Technology. And James Locke, former Special Activities Division Commander." Vance pulled up photos of 3 people who looked like they belonged in corporate boardrooms, not on wanted posters. All brilliant, all connected, all completely amoral. They built the Centurion Group to fill the gap between what the government could do legally and what needed to be done to protect American interests abroad. "You mean they became mercenaries with government contracts?" Michael's tone was flat, disgusted. "Mercenaries with extremely lucrative government contracts and no accountability. They started small, security work, logistics support, technical consulting. But they grew quickly because they were willing to do things official agencies couldn't. Need someone killed without a paper trail? Centurion had operators who'd make it look like an accident. Need intelligence stolen from a foreign government? Centurion had hackers who could breach any system. Need a regime change that Congress wouldn't approve? Centurion had psychological warfare specialists who could destabilize a country without firing a shot. Agent Chen picked up the narrative. For years, they operated in a gray area, technically legal, morally questionable, but useful enough that people in power looked the other way. But then they started selling their services to the highest bidder, regardless of whether that bidder was American or not. Chinese military contractors, Russian oligarchs, Middle Eastern governments were supposedly allied against. Centurion didn't discriminate as long as the money was good. And the software vulnerabilities Evelyn testified about. Michael was already seeing how the pieces fit together. Were intentional backdoors that Centurion planned to sell to multiple parties. The Department of Defense paid them to create secure logistics software. They created software that appeared secure but had access points they could exploit or sell. It was brilliant and treasonous in equal measure. Vance's expression was grim. Ms. Zhao discovered the backdoors during a routine security audit. She reported them, testified about them, and destroyed a revenue stream worth billions to the Centurion Group. So they decided she had to die. Not just die. They wanted to make an example of her. The attack at Sterling Tower was supposed to look like a terrorist incident, mass casualties, chaos, and Evelyn Zhao dead in the crossfire. It would have discredited her testimony, made her look like someone who attracted violence rather than exposed corruption. Vance looked at Michael directly. You prevented that, but you also made yourself a target. They know now that Miss Zhao has protection beyond standard corporate security. They know someone with your level of skill is involved, and they'll adjust their tactics accordingly. Michael absorbed this information, his mind already racing through implications and countermeasures. The New York summit, they'll try again there. We believe so. It's their best opportunity. Public venue, limited time for security preparation, and if they succeed, they can blame it on the chaos of a large event. Walsh pulled up a floor plan of the Javits Center on the tablet. We've been coordinating with NYPD and FBI field offices in New York. You'll have support, but Captain, you need to understand that the Centurion Group has resources we can barely track. They have operators embedded in law enforcement, in private security companies, possibly even in federal agencies. Anyone could be working for them. So trust no one. I've operated under those conditions before. Michael studied the floor plan, noting entry points, sight lines, potential kill zones. What about the three founders? Where are they? Unknown. Reeves, Chen, and Locke went underground after the congressional investigation started. We have warrants, but they're ghosts, better at disappearing than most intelligence officers because they wrote the playbook on how to vanish. Vance closed her tablet. But they're still running Centurion operations. We've intercepted communications that suggest they're personally overseeing the campaign against Ms. Zhao. This isn't just business to them anymore. It's personal. She humiliated them, cost them billions, and threatened their entire operation. They want her dead, and they want it to be messy. The office door opened without knocking, and Evelyn walked in, clearly having overheard at least part of the conversation from the hallway. How messy are we talking about? Walsh stood, surprised by her sudden appearance. Ms. Zhao, this is a classified briefing. About threats to my life. I think I have clearance for that, Director Walsh. Evelyn's tone was sharp, unamused. How messy, Rachel Vance answered when Walsh hesitated. They want you to die publicly and violently. They want it to look like your crusade against corruption attracted extremists who killed you. They want your death to serve as a warning to anyone else who might consider testifying against them. She paused, considering whether to continue, then decided brutal honesty was kinder than comfortable lies. They also want Michael dead. He's the one who killed Marcus Webb and his team. The Centurion Group views him as a threat that needs to be eliminated before he becomes a larger problem. And Sophie? Michael's voice was deadly quiet. Are they targeting my daughter? We don't have intelligence suggesting that. Yet. But Captain, you need to prepare for the possibility. The Centurion Group doesn't have ethical boundaries. If they think threatening Sophie will make you back off, they won't hesitate. Michael stood so abruptly that his chair rolled backward and hit the wall. He walked to the window, his hands clenched into fists, breathing slowly and deliberately. Everyone in the room understood they were watching a man fight for control, watching a father contemplate the nightmare scenario that every parent feared. Evelyn moved to stand beside him, not touching, but present. We can still walk away, both of us. Take Sophie somewhere safe, disappear, let someone else fight this battle. There is no walking away. Michael's reflection in the window glass looked older than his years, harder. They know who I am now. They know about Sophie. Even if we ran, they'd find us eventually. The only way to keep her safe is to eliminate the threat completely. He turned to face the assembled intelligence officers. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to New York. We're going to let them make their move. And we're going to destroy them so thoroughly that no one from the Centurion group will ever threaten my daughter again. Walsh nodded slowly. That's the plan. We use the summit as bait, draw them out, and take them down with overwhelming force. It's risky. It's suicide with tactical support. Agent Chen interrupted, his expression troubled. The Centurion group has some of the best operators in the world working for them. Former Delta, former SEAL Team 6, former CIA Special Activities. They're not going to send amateurs. They're going to send a team that can breach whatever security we establish and complete their mission before we can respond. Then we don't establish obvious security. Michael was already thinking tactically, planning the operation the way he'd planned dozens of others. We make it look like Evelyn has minimal protection, visible security that appears adequate but isn't overwhelming. We make them think they have an opportunity, and then we position real assets in places they won't expect, with overlapping fields of fire and response protocols that can lock down the entire venue in seconds. You want to use Miss Zhao as bait. Vance's statement wasn't a question. I want to use both of us as bait. They're coming for her, but they're also coming for me now. We're both targets, which means we're both assets in this operation. Michael looked at Evelyn, but only if you agree. This is your life we're gambling with. You get to decide if the risk is worth it. Evelyn was quiet for a moment, considering. The safe choice was obvious. Cancel the summit appearance, go into protective custody, let the federal government handle the prosecution while she stayed hidden. It was the smart choice, the logical choice, the choice that prioritized survival over principles. But Evelyn Zhao hadn't built her company by making safe choices. She'd built it by taking calculated risks, by believing that some things were worth fighting for, even when the odds were bad. I'm going to New York. Her voice was steady, certain. I'm accepting that award. I'm giving my speech about the importance of ethical technology and standing up against corruption. And I'm doing it because if I don't, then the Centurion group wins. They'll have proven that violence works, that threats are effective, that telling the truth about powerful people is too dangerous to be worth it. She looked around the room, meeting each person's eyes in turn. I won't live in that world. I won't let them create that world. So yes, use me as bait. Let them come. And when they do, make sure they regret it. The decision made, the tone of the meeting shifted from debate to planning. Michael and Walsh worked through security protocols while Chen coordinated with New York law enforcement, and Vance compiled intelligence on known Centurion operatives who might be deployed. Evelyn watched them work, seeing the military precision beneath the civilian clothing, understanding that she'd just committed herself to a battle where defeat meant death. She wasn't naive enough to think she'd survive on courage alone, but she also wasn't naive enough to think hiding would keep her safe. The Centurion group had already proven they could reach her anywhere. Better to face them on ground she'd chosen, with allies she trusted, than to wait for them to attack when and where they had all the advantages. The meeting broke up after 2 hours, with everyone clear on their roles and responsibilities. Walsh and his team left first, their government SUVs pulling away from Zhao Systems headquarters with the aggressive confidence of federal authority. Vance lingered, pulled Michael aside while Evelyn was distracted by a call from her assistant. Captain Cross, I need you to understand something. Her voice was low, urgent. The Centurion group doesn't fail often. When they do, they learn from it and come back stronger. Marcus Webb was their first attempt, brutal and direct. The next attempt won't be. It'll be subtle, complicated, something you won't see coming until it's too late. I appreciate the warning. Michael's tone suggested he'd already considered this. I'm not sure you do. You're thinking like a military operator. Identify the threat, establish a perimeter, control the environment. But the Centurion group doesn't operate that way. They operate like intelligence officers. They manipulate, they deceive, they attack from directions you didn't know existed. Vance glanced at Evelyn, still on her phone call, then back to Michael. They might not try to kill her at all. They might try to discredit her, destroy her reputation, make her testimony worthless in court. Or they might go after the people she cares about, employees, friends, family. They might make her choose between her principles and the people she loves. I'm prepared for that. Michael said it with more confidence than he felt. Are you prepared for them to go after Sophie? Because, Captain, if they decide that threatening your daughter is the fastest way to neutralize you, they will do it without hesitation. and no amount of security can protect her if they're truly determined. Vance's expression was sympathetic but unflinching. I've seen what the Centurion Group does to people who get in their way. I've investigated crime scenes that looked like accidents but were carefully staged murders. I've interviewed witnesses who later recanted their statements because someone threatened their children. I've watched good people break under pressure that never let up. You need to prepare yourself for the possibility that keeping Miss Zhao alive might cost you everything you care about. Michael met her gaze, and Vance saw something in his eyes that made her step back slightly, a darkness that came from places she'd only read about in classified reports. If they touch my daughter, there won't be enough of the Centurion Group left to investigate. There won't be crime scenes or witnesses or evidence. There will just be empty buildings and bodies that are never found. Do you understand me, Agent Vance? I understand that you're a father who's scared for his child. I also understand that the Centurion Group is counting on that fear to control you. Don't let them weaponize your love, Captain. That's how they win. Vance pulled out a business card, handed it to him. My personal number. If anything happens, anything, you call me directly. No chain of command, no protocol. You call me, and I'll move heaven and earth to help. You have my word. Michael took the card, slipped it into his pocket. Thank you. Vance left, and Michael stood alone in his office, looking at the wall he hadn't yet decorated with photos or certificates or the personal artifacts people used to claim space as their own. This office was temporary, just like every place he'd inhabited for the past 8 years. Nothing permanent, nothing that couldn't be abandoned in an emergency. It was a survival strategy that had worked perfectly until now. But Sophie deserved permanence. She deserved a home that was more than a tactical position, a life that was more than contingency plans and emergency protocols. She deserved normal, and Michael had promised her they'd get back to normal soon. He just had to survive New York first. The weekend passed in a blur of preparation. Michael flew to New York on Saturday, spent Sunday walking the Javits Center with a security team that had been vetted 3 times by 3 different agencies. He memorized every entrance, every corridor, every potential approach vector. He identified positions where Centurion operatives might stage, planned counter-responses for each scenario, and briefed the security team on protocols that sounded paranoid until you understood what they were defending against. He also visited the hotel where Evelyn would stay, a boutique property in Midtown that catered to executives who valued privacy over prestige. Michael inspected her suite personally, checked the locks, tested the windows, identified emergency exits. He positioned federal agents in adjoining rooms and posted security in the lobby. He did everything possible to create a protective cocoon that would keep Evelyn safe, and he knew it wouldn't be enough. Because Rachel Vance had been right, the Centurion Group didn't operate like normal criminals. They operated like intelligence officers, which meant they'd already identified every precaution he'd taken and planned around it. Michael flew back to Boston on Sunday night, went directly from the airport to the Brookline safe house where Sophie was staying. Agent Morrison met him at the door with a slight smile. She's been asking about you all weekend. I think she's planning to guilt trip you for missing movie night. I deserve it. Michael found Sophie in the living room, curled up on the couch, with a new book. Something about wizards this time instead of dragons. She looked up when he entered, and her face lit up in a way that made his chest ache. Daddy, you're back. I'm back. He sat beside her, and she immediately climbed into his lap, her small arms wrapping around his neck. She smelled like kid shampoo and the cookies Agent Morrison had probably snuck her after dinner. I missed you, sweetheart. I missed you too. Morrison let me stay up late on Friday, and we watched a movie about superheroes. It was okay, but not as good as the dragon movie we watched last month. She pulled back to look at him seriously. Are you going away again? Tuesday. I'll be in New York for a few days, but I'll call you every night before bed and I'll be back by Friday. I promise. Sophie nodded, accepting this the way she'd learned to accept all the disruptions to their life. Is the lady you're protecting nice? You said she was brave, but you didn't say if she's nice. She's nice. She's also very smart and works hard to protect people, kind of like I do, but with computers instead of... Michael trailed off, unsure how to explain security work to a 7-year-old. Instead of fighting, Sophie finished for him, casual as if they were discussing his commute instead of combat operations. Agent Morrison told me you used to fight bad guys. like Captain America but without the shield. Michael made a mental note to have words with Agent Morrison about age-appropriate comparisons. Something like that. But sweetheart, I need you to understand something important. This week is going to be a little dangerous. Not for you. You're completely safe here, and Agent Morrison and his team will make sure nothing bad happens. But for me and Ms. Zhao, things might get complicated. Complicated like the night at the tower? Maybe. I don't know yet. But if something does happen, I need you to remember that I love you, and I'm doing everything I can to come back to you. Can you remember that? Sophie's eyes welled up with tears, and Michael immediately regretted saying anything, but she needed to hear it, needed to understand that Tuesday might be the last time he saw her if things went wrong in New York. He owed her the truth, even if the truth was terrifying.
You're scaring me. Her voice was small, childlike, in a way she usually wasn't anymore. I know. I'm sorry. But I need you to be brave, just like the dragons in your books. Can you do that for me? Dragons aren't real, Daddy. They're just stories. But the bravery is real.
The part where they face things that scare them because it's the right thing to do, that's real. And that's what I'm doing this week. Facing something scary because people need help, and I'm one of the few people who can help them. Michael kissed her forehead, held her close. I'm going to be okay. I promise. But if I'm not, Agent Morrison will take care of you until Uncle Walsh can make different arrangements. I don't have an Uncle Walsh. Director Walsh. He's not really your uncle, but he's a good man and he'll make sure you're safe and happy, okay? Sophie nodded against his chest, her tears soaking into his shirt. They sat like that for a long time, father and daughter, holding on to each other against the uncertainty of what Tuesday would bring. Eventually, Sophie fell asleep, exhausted by emotion, and Michael carried her to her temporary bedroom, tucked her in with her wizard book on the nightstand and a nightlight that cast stars across the ceiling. He stood in the doorway, watching her sleep, and made a silent promise. He would survive New York. He would eliminate the Centurion group as a threat, and he would give Sophie the normal life she deserved, even if he had to burn the world down to make it happen. Monday was Evelyn's last full day in Boston before New York. Michael spent the morning at Zhao Systems, coordinating final security arrangements and briefing her team on emergency protocols. He spent the afternoon with Sophie, taking her to the park under the watchful eyes of 2 federal agents who pretended to be joggers. He pushed her on the swings, helped her across the monkey bars, and tried to memorize every detail of her laugh and her smile and the way she looked at him like he was the entire world. That evening, he returned to Zhao Systems to find Evelyn still in her office, working on the speech she'd deliver at the summit. She looked exhausted, the stress of the past week showing in the shadows under her eyes and the tension in her shoulders. You should rest. Michael leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed. Tomorrow's going to be demanding. I can't rest. Every time I close my eyes, I see Marcus Webb's face. I hear him telling me I'm going to die. I feel his hand on my wrist, dragging me toward... She stopped, took a breath, forced herself to continue. I'm terrified, Michael. I'm absolutely terrified, and I keep working because if I stop working, all I have left is the fear. Michael entered the office, closed the door, and sat across from her desk. Fear is normal. Fear keeps you alert, keeps you careful. The problem isn't feeling fear, it's letting fear control you. Right now you're using work to manage fear, which is fine as a short-term strategy. But eventually, you're going to have to face it directly. Is that what you do? Face your fear directly? I've spent my entire adult life being afraid. Afraid I'll fail a mission. Afraid I'll get someone killed. Afraid I'll die in some foreign country and Sophie will grow up without a father. I'm afraid right now, terrified that tomorrow will go wrong and I won't be fast enough or smart enough to keep you safe. Michael's voice was steady, honest. But I've learned that fear is just information. It tells you what matters, what's at stake, what you need to protect. The trick is acknowledging the fear without letting it paralyze you. Evelyn studied him in the low office light, seeing vulnerability she hadn't expected from someone who killed with such precision. How do you do it? Acknowledge the fear without being paralyzed? I remember what I'm fighting for, not abstract concepts like justice or duty. Those are too big to hold on to when bullets are flying. I remember Sophie's face. I remember that if I fail, she loses her father. That fear is bigger than any fear of dying or getting hurt. It's the fear that drives everything else. He paused. Tomorrow, when you're standing on that stage and you're afraid, remember why you testified in the first place. Remember the people who will be hurt if the Centurion group isn't stopped. Make your fear about them instead of yourself, and you'll find the courage you need. That's very philosophical for someone who shoots people for a living. I don't shoot people for a living. I protect people for a living. Shooting is just occasionally necessary. Michael stood, moved toward the door. Get some sleep, Evelyn. Real sleep, not just working until you pass out at your desk. Tomorrow, we fly to New York, and I need you sharp. Michael? She stopped him before he could leave. Thank you for everything, for saving my life, for risking Sophie's safety, for believing that what I'm doing matters enough to die for. I don't take any of that lightly. I know you don't. That's why I'm still here. He left her office, walked through the empty building to the parking garage, and drove home to his apartment in Dorchester. The place felt hollow without Sophie. Her toys scattered across the living room floor, her drawings on the refrigerator, her toothbrush in the bathroom, all the small artifacts of her presence made the absence more acute. Michael packed a bag for New York, checked his weapons and gear methodically, and tried to sleep in a bed that felt too large and too empty. He dreamed of Afghanistan, of the IED blast that should have killed him, of waking up in a hospital with doctors telling him he'd lost 3 friends and barely survived himself. He dreamed of Sophie at 3 years old, too young to understand why Daddy couldn't pick her up anymore, why he winced when she hugged him too hard. He dreamed of 8 years of hiding, of being someone other than himself, of pretending that peace was possible when violence was always just beneath the surface. He woke at 4 in the morning, gave up on sleep, and went for a run through Dorchester's empty streets. The city was quiet in that pre-dawn darkness, and Michael ran until his lungs burned and his legs ached, trying to outrun the certainty that tomorrow would change everything. Tuesday morning arrived with unseasonable warmth, the kind of October day that felt stolen from summer. Michael picked up Evelyn at 7, drove her to Boston's Logan Airport, where a private charter waited. Director Walsh had insisted on the charter. Commercial flights had too many variables, too many opportunities for the Centurion group to make a move. The small jet carried just the 2 of them, plus a flight crew that had been security cleared twice. Evelyn was quiet during the flight, staring out the window at clouds below, lost in thoughts Michael didn't interrupt. He understood the need for silence before battle, the internal preparation that came from knowing your life was about to be risked for principles that suddenly felt fragile and abstract. They landed at Teterboro Airport in New Jersey, bypassing the chaos of JFK and LaGuardia. A motorcade waited. 3 black SUVs with drivers Michael had personally vetted and federal agents riding as security. They drove into Manhattan through mid-morning traffic, a journey that should have been routine but felt laden with significance. The hotel lobby was quiet, upscale without being ostentatious, the kind of place where celebrities stayed when they wanted privacy instead of attention. Michael checked them in using aliases, then escorted Evelyn to her suite while agents secured the corridor and positioned themselves at strategic points. Rest, he told her. The summit doesn't start until 4, and your speech isn't until 7. You have time. I don't think I can rest. But she sat on the suite's couch anyway, looked around at the generic luxury. This feels like a last meal before an execution. Everything's too nice, too comfortable, like the world is trying to make up for what's about to happen. Nothing's going to happen. You're going to give your speech, accept your award, and we're going to fly back to Boston tonight. That's the plan. Plans change. You said that yourself. The Centurion group will attack from a direction we don't expect. Evelyn looked at him directly. Do you really think we'll both survive today? Michael wanted to lie, to offer reassurance that would comfort her even if it wasn't true. But she deserved honesty, deserved to face whatever came with clear eyes and realistic expectations. I think we have a good chance. I think the security we've established is solid, the tactical support is extensive, and I'm very good at my job. But I also think the Centurion group is competent and motivated, and they've had a week to plan. So yes, there's risk, real risk, the kind that doesn't come with guarantees. He sat beside her on the couch, close but not touching. If something does go wrong, if they breach our security and get close, I need you to follow my instructions exactly. No questions, no hesitation. Can you do that? I can do that. Good. Then try to rest. I'll be right outside your door. Michael left the suite, positioned himself in the hallway where he could watch both the elevator and the stairwell access. Other agents were scattered throughout the hotel, but he trusted his own vigilance more than anyone else's. Hours passed slowly, marked by people coming and going, hotel guests, staff, delivery personnel. Michael watched them all, assessed them all, saw threats in every stranger's face. At 3 o'clock, Evelyn emerged from her suite wearing a charcoal suit that was professional and elegant, her hair styled simply, her makeup minimal. She looked like a tech executive preparing for a business engagement, not someone expecting an assassination attempt. Michael approved. The Centurion group would be watching for signs of heightened security, looking for indications that their target knew they were coming. Appearing calm and confident would make them think their operation remained covert. "Ready?" Michael asked. "No, but let's go anyway." They took the motorcade to the Javits Center, arriving as the summit was beginning its afternoon sessions. The convention center was massive, 900,000 square feet of exhibition space, meeting rooms, and auditorium seating. It hosted dozens of events simultaneously, which meant thousands of people moving through corridors and lobbies, any one of whom could be a Centurion operative. Michael and Evelyn entered through a side entrance that had been secured by NYPD, bypassing the main crowds. They were escorted to a VIP holding area where other award recipients waited nervously. Evelyn made small talk with a founder of a renewable energy startup and the CEO of an educational technology company, both of whom seemed unaware that one of their fellow honorees was a target for assassination. Michael stood near the wall, his eyes constantly moving, tracking people and patterns and anything that felt wrong. Agent Chen appeared beside him, speaking quietly. "Perimeter is secure. We have tactical teams positioned at all major entrances, plainclothes officers throughout the exhibition floor, and counter-sniper units on the roof. NYPD has been briefed, and they're running facial recognition on everyone who enters. If any known Centurion operatives try to access the building, we'll know immediately." "What about unknowns, contractors we haven't identified, new recruits, people who aren't in any database?" Michael's question was sharp. "We're doing our best, Captain, but you know as well as I do that perfect security is impossible. We're minimizing risk, not eliminating it." Minimizing might not be good enough. Michael watched the door as more people entered the holding area, summit organizers, media escorts, a photographer who looked nervous and held his camera like it might explode. The Centurion group didn't survive this long by being predictable. They're going to hit us from an angle we haven't prepared for. Then we adapt and respond. That's why you're here, Captain. You're our ace in the hole, the asset they don't know about, the variable in their equation. Chen glanced at Evelyn, who was laughing at something the renewable energy founder had said. "She's handling this well. Most people would be falling apart." "She's terrified. She's just good at hiding it." Michael's respect for Evelyn had grown throughout the past week. She had every reason to be paralyzed by fear, but instead, she was functioning, performing, refusing to let threats control her behavior. It was the kind of courage that couldn't be trained. You either had it or you didn't. At 6:30, an organizer approached with clipboards and schedules, explaining the ceremony format. Evelyn would be introduced at 7:15, would give a brief acceptance speech, and then participate in a moderated discussion about technology ethics. The entire segment would last approximately 45 minutes, after which there would be a reception where she could network with other attendees. "Skip the reception," Michael said immediately. "We accept the award, give the speech, participate in the discussion, and leave. No lingering, no meet and greet." The organizer looked disappointed but nodded. "If that's what Ms. Zhao prefers." "It is." Evelyn's tone left no room for debate. 7 o'clock arrived, and they were escorted toward the main auditorium. Michael walked slightly behind and to the left of Evelyn, his hand resting casually near his concealed weapon, his eyes scanning constantly. The corridor was packed with people heading to various sessions, and Michael tracked each face, each movement, looking for anything that suggested hostile intent. They reached the auditorium entrance, and Michael stopped suddenly, his hand coming up to halt Evelyn. Something was wrong. He couldn't articulate what, couldn't point to specific evidence, but 8 years of combat operations had taught him to trust his instincts when they screamed danger. What is it? Evelyn whispered. I don't know, but something's off. Michael keyed his radio, spoke quickly. Chen, do we have eyes on all exits from the auditorium? Affirmative? Why? Because I think we're walking into a trap. The ceremony, the timing, the setup, it's too perfect. They want her on that stage, exposed, with 1,000 people in the audience for cover. Michael was thinking out loud now, working through the tactical problem. They won't shoot her. Too obvious, too many witnesses. But they could grab her during the confusion after the ceremony, or plan an explosive in the auditorium timed to detonate after she's off stage. We swept the auditorium twice. It's clean. Sweep it again, now. And I want all security personnel to verify their credentials with direct supervisor contact. No radio confirmation, actual voice contact. Someone on our team might be compromised. There was a pause. Then Chen's voice came back tight with tension. Copy that. Initiating secondary sweep and credential verification. Do you want to delay the ceremony? Michael looked at Evelyn, saw the question in her eyes. They could delay, could claim technical difficulties or health concerns, could buy time for more security measures. But delaying might just postpone the inevitable attack, and next time, they might not have warning. No delay, but we go in hot. I want tactical teams ready to respond instantly, and I want an evacuation route that doesn't use main exits. Can you arrange that? There's a service corridor behind the stage that leads to the loading docks. I'll have it secured. Do it. And Chen, if this goes wrong, get Evelyn out first. Me second. The ceremony attendees third. That's the priority order. Understood. Good luck, Captain. Michael turned off his radio and looked at Evelyn. Last chance to back out. Not a chance. Her voice was steady, determined. Let's go give them their show. They entered the auditorium together, Michael's hand close to his weapon. His awareness expanded to encompass everything. The stage crew adjusting lights, the audience members finding seats, the security personnel positioned at intervals along the walls. His eyes tracked patterns, identified anomalies, searched for the threat he knew was coming but couldn't yet see. The ceremony began with opening remarks from the summit director, a woman in her 50s who spoke passionately about technology's role in building a better future. Then came the awards, presented one by one to founders and CEOs who'd made contributions to various fields. Each recipient gave a brief speech, accepted their award, and exited to applause. Evelyn was fourth in the sequence. When her name was announced, Evelyn Zhao, founder and CEO of Zhao Systems, for her work in protecting critical infrastructure and her courage in exposing security vulnerabilities, the applause was substantial, warm. She walked onto the stage with apparent confidence, shook hands with the summit director, and accepted a crystal award that caught the stage lights and threw rainbow reflections. Michael watched from the wings, his body coiled tight, ready to move. The audience numbered approximately 800 people, all seated, all focused on the stage. Any one of them could be a threat. Any one of them could have a weapon concealed under business casual clothing. The only thing keeping Evelyn safe was the hope that the Centurion group wouldn't risk such a public attack. But hope wasn't a strategy, and Michael didn't believe in hope. Evelyn began her speech, and her voice carried through the auditorium with clarity and conviction. 8 months ago, I discovered that software trusted to protect military logistics had been compromised. I reported this discovery knowing it would make enemies among powerful people. I testified before Congress, knowing it would put my company and my safety at risk. I did these things because I believe that truth matters more than convenience, that security requires vigilance, and that those of us with technical expertise have an obligation to protect the systems that society depends on. The audience was rapt, hanging on every word. Michael wasn't watching Evelyn. He was watching everyone else, tracking movement and expression and body language. In the third row, a man stood abruptly and moved toward the aisle. In the back corner, a woman had her hand in her purse, fumbling for something. Near the stage right exit, a security guard was speaking urgently into his radio. Any of these could be innocent. Any of these could be lethal. Evelyn continued. The Centurion group tried to silence me. They sent armed men to kill me at a public gala, and they would have succeeded if not for the intervention of someone braver than myself. They're trying to silence me now, hoping that fear will do what violence couldn't. But I'm here tonight to tell you that fear is not wisdom, and silence is not safety. We must speak up against corruption, even when it's dangerous. We must stand for truth, even when it's costly. Because the alternative, a world where power can operate without accountability, is not a world worth living in. The applause started before she finished, building to a standing ovation. Michael saw it happen in slow motion, the audience rising to their feet, the sound swelling, bodies blocking sight lines and creating chaos. This was the moment. This was when the Centurion group would make their move. His radio crackled. "Captain, we have a situation. The security guard at stage right. His credentials don't match our database. He's not NYPD. Repeat, we have a hostile in the building." Michael was already moving, his weapon drawn, pushing through backstage personnel toward the stage right exit where the false guard stood. The man saw him coming, recognized the threat, and reached for his own weapon. Michael covered the distance in 3 strides, his hand snapping out to trap the man's gun hand before it could clear the holster. He drove his knee into the man's solar plexus, followed with an elbow to the jaw, and the hostile went down hard. "Evelyn, get down!" Michael's shout cut through the applause, and years of military training overrode civilian instinct. Evelyn dropped to the stage floor, her crystal award tumbling from her hands. That's when the lights went out. The darkness was absolute and immediate, the kind of blackout that spoke of deliberate sabotage rather than electrical failure. 800 people gasped in unison, the sound swelling into confused murmurs and then panicked shouts as the reality of their situation registered. Emergency lighting should have activated within seconds. Building codes required it, safety protocols demanded it. But the emergency lights stayed dark, which meant someone had disabled them intentionally, which meant this wasn't just an attack on Evelyn Zhao. This was a coordinated assault on the entire venue. Michael's training kicked in with the automatic precision of muscle memory. He dropped to a crouch, making himself a smaller target, his left hand finding the tactical flashlight attached to his belt, while his right maintained its grip on his weapon. He activated the light in a brief controlled burst, just enough to illuminate the stage and locate Evelyn without giving hostile operators a sustained target to aim at. She was where he told her to be, flat against the stage floor, her hands covering her head. Smart, obedient, alive. "Stay down." Michael's voice cut through the chaos with command authority that made Evelyn freeze even as every instinct probably screamed at her to run. "Don't move until I tell you." His radio crackled with multiple voices trying to speak simultaneously, agents and officers reporting from positions throughout the Javits Center. Michael filtered through the noise, listening for actionable intelligence while his eyes adjusted to the darkness. The auditorium windows let in ambient light from the Manhattan skyline. Not much, but enough to create shadows and silhouettes. Enough to see shapes moving through the audience in patterns that suggested training rather than panic. "Multiple hostiles confirmed." Agent Chen's voice finally broke through the radio chaos. "At least 6 operators moving through the crowd, all armed. They're herding people toward the main exits. Tactical teams are responding, but we're dealing with a civilian stampede that's blocking access." "They're not trying to kill her here." Michael processed this information rapidly, his mind working through tactical implications. "They're using the panic to create confusion, blocking our response teams while they extract their real asset." "Chen, where's the secondary sweep team, the one I asked you to deploy?" "Static." Then, "Captain, we have a problem. The secondary team isn't responding. Their last known position was the service corridor behind the stage, the evacuation route we planned to use." Michael's blood went cold. The service corridor, the secure exit route, the path he'd intended to use to get Evelyn out of danger, compromised. The Centurion group hadn't just attacked the ceremony. They'd infiltrated the security response, positioned themselves along the evacuation route, and now they were waiting for Michael to do exactly what he was trained to do. They'd turned his own tactical planning against him. "New plan." Michael's voice was calm, decisive, the voice of someone who'd operated under impossible conditions and survived through adaptation. "We're not evacuating through service corridors. We're going through the audience, blending with the civilian exodus. Chen, I need your teams to open the main exits and let people flow out naturally. Don't try to control the crowd, just guide them away from the building. Make it look like a successful evacuation." "Captain, that puts Ms. Zhao in the middle of hundreds of panicked civilians. She'll be exposed." "She's already exposed. At least in the crowd, the Centurion group can't risk weapons fire without hitting bystanders. They'll have to try for a grab and extract, which means getting close, which means I can engage them directly. Michael was already moving, crawling across the stage toward Evelyn. Execute the order. Open the exits. Now! He reached Evelyn, touched her shoulder to orient her in the darkness. Listen carefully. We're going to walk off this stage, down the side steps, and merge with the crowd heading for the exits. You're going to stay directly in front of me, close enough that I can reach you, but not so close we look like we're together. You're going to move at a steady pace, not too fast, not too slow. You're going to be just another person trying to leave a scary situation. Michael, I can't see anything. Her voice was steady, despite the fear underneath. How am I supposed to navigate through a crowd in the dark? You follow the movement. People naturally flow toward light, toward exits, toward perceived safety. You let the crowd carry you, but you maintain awareness. If I say drop, you drop instantly. If I say run, you run without looking back. If I say left or right, you move in that direction immediately. No questions, no hesitation. Understand? I understand. Good. Michael helped her to her feet, keeping his body between her and the auditorium. His flashlight swept the space in controlled bursts, giving him snapshot images of the situation. The stage right exit where he'd neutralized the false security guard was blocked by bodies. The guard's unconscious form had created an obstacle that people were tripping over in the darkness. The stage left exit was clear, and through it Michael could see the audience moving toward the main doors. A slow-motion stampede guided more by instinct than organization. They descended the stage steps, Evelyn in front, Michael behind and slightly to her right to shield her from the most likely threat vectors. The audience pressed around them immediately, people pushing and shoving with the desperate urgency of prey animals fleeing a predator they couldn't see. Someone's elbow caught Michael's ribs. Someone else stepped on Evelyn's foot, making her stumble. Michael's hand shot out, steadying her, and they kept moving. His eyes tracked everything, categorizing threats with the cold efficiency of long practice. A man moving against the flow of the crowd, possible hostile, but could also be someone trying to find family members. A woman with her hand in her jacket, weapon, or just securing her phone. Two people moving in coordinated parallel paths, definitely trained, definitely hostile. Michael keyed his radio with his free hand. Chen, I have visual on two hostiles at my 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock, moving in a pincer pattern. They're trying to box us in. I need an intervention before they close the distance. Negative, Captain. All our tactical personnel are engaged with other hostiles throughout the building. This is bigger than we thought. They have at least 15 operators on site, maybe more. You're on your own until we can disengage. 15 operators. The Centurion group had deployed enough personnel for a military raid, not an assassination. They'd committed resources that suggested this wasn't just about killing Evelyn Zhao. This was about making a statement, about proving that no amount of security could protect someone they wanted dead. Michael's mind raced through options. He couldn't engage two trained operators in a crowd full of civilians without risking massive collateral casualties. He couldn't outrun them because Evelyn wasn't trained for evasion and would be too slow. He couldn't call for backup because backup was already overwhelmed. He was alone with a civilian dependent in hostile territory, facing enemies who had every advantage. It was exactly the kind of impossible situation he'd been trained for. Evelyn, when I say run, you're going to break right toward that exit sign. Michael pointed to an emergency exit barely visible in the darkness, its illuminated sign somehow still functioning. You're going to run as fast as you can, and you're not going to stop for anything. I'll be right behind you. What about the hostiles? I'll handle them. You just run. Michael's tone left no room for argument. Ready? 3, 2, 1, run! Evelyn bolted, her business shoes pounding against the floor as she sprinted toward the exit. Michael turned to face the two hostiles closing in, his weapon coming up, his body creating a physical barrier between the threat and his protectee. The hostile at 3 o'clock reached him first, a man in his 30s with the wiry build of someone who practiced violence professionally. He came in fast, confident, his hands moving toward Michael's weapon in a disarm attempt that would have worked on most people. Michael wasn't most people. He pivoted, letting the hostile's momentum carry him past, and drove the butt of his weapon into the man's kidney with enough force to shut down his nervous system. The hostile dropped, gasping, and Michael was already moving toward the second threat, a woman who'd pulled a compact tactical knife and was closing the distance with predatory grace. She was good. Michael saw it in her stance, in the way she held the knife, in the controlled aggression of her approach. Former military, probably special operations, now selling her skills to whoever paid best. Under different circumstances, they might have been colleagues. Under these circumstances, one of them was going to the hospital and the other was walking away. The woman feinted left, came in right, her knife seeking Michael's torso with professional precision. He blocked with his forearm, felt the blade slice through his jacket and bite into flesh. Shallow, painful, but not debilitating. His counterstrike was immediate and brutal, an elbow to her jaw that snapped her head back and sent her stumbling. She recovered faster than expected, came at him again, and Michael realized he didn't have time for this engagement. Evelyn was already at the emergency exit, pushing through the door into whatever lay beyond. Michael needed to be with her, needed to maintain protective coverage, needed to stop wasting time on enemies who didn't matter compared to the primary mission. He shot the woman in the leg. Not a kill shot, not even particularly accurate given the darkness and the movement, but enough to put her on the ground and take her out of the fight. She went down screaming, clutching her thigh, and Michael was already running toward the exit where Evelyn had disappeared. He hit the door at full speed, burst through into a service corridor that was dimly lit by emergency lighting that actually worked. Evelyn stood 20 feet ahead, her back against the wall, her chest heaving with exertion and fear. Between her and Michael stood 3 more hostiles, 2 men and a woman, all armed, all wearing the kind of tactical gear that spoke of serious preparation. The woman in the center spoke, her voice calm and professional. "Captain Cross? Or should I call you Phantom? I've read your file. Impressive operational record. It's unfortunate we have to meet under these circumstances." "Step aside." Michael's weapon was trained on her center mass, his stance balanced and ready. "You don't have to die for the Centurion group. Walk away now and you might survive this." "Walk away from a multi-million-dollar contract? I don't think so." The woman smiled without warmth. "Besides, you're not going to shoot, not with 3 weapons trained on your protectee. The moment you fire, we fire, and Ms. Zhao dies. You can maybe take one of us, possibly 2 if you're as good as your reputation suggests, but the third will definitely kill her. That's basic math, Captain." She was right, and they both knew it. Michael had faced overwhelming odds before, had fought his way out of situations that should have been fatal. But he'd been alone in those scenarios, responsible only for his own survival. This was different. This was about keeping someone else alive while simultaneously neutralizing multiple threats in a confined space with limited room for maneuver. The tactical mathematics didn't work in his favor. "What do you want?" Michael kept his weapon steady, buying time while his mind worked through increasingly desperate options. "Simple exchange. Miss Zhao comes with us quietly, and you get to walk away. Live to fight another day, go back to your daughter, pretend this never happened. We have no quarrel with you, Captain. This is business, not personal." "Everything's personal when you threaten my protectee." Michael's voice was flat, cold. "And I'm not in the habit of trading lives for my own safety." "Then you're in the habit of dying for principles that won't matter once you're dead." The woman's tone suggested she'd had this conversation before, probably with other operators who'd made similar choices and ended up in graves no one visited. "Last chance, Captain. Stand down or die. Choose." Michael looked past the 3 hostiles to Evelyn, saw the fear in her eyes but also something else, determination, defiance, the stubborn courage that had gotten her into this situation in the first place. She'd testified against the Centurion group knowing it would make her a target. She'd come to New York knowing they'd try to kill her. She'd stood on that stage and given her speech about truth and accountability while knowing that armed operators were probably in the audience waiting to strike. She wasn't going to surrender now, and Michael wasn't going to let her be taken. "Third option," Michael said quietly. He fired 3 shots in rapid succession, not at the hostiles, but at the overhead fluorescent light fixtures. The corridor plunged into darkness as the lights exploded in showers of sparks and shattered glass. In that split second of confusion, when the hostiles' eyes were still adjusting and their weapons were still trained on where Michael had been standing, he moved. He went low and left, his body sliding across the floor toward the nearest hostile's position. His hand found the man's ankle, pulled hard, and the hostile went down in a crash of equipment and cursing. Michael was on him immediately, his weapon pressed against the man's temple, using the body as a shield against the other two operators. "Evelyn, run! Straight down the corridor, through the door at the end. Don't stop." Michael's shout cut through the darkness, and he heard her footsteps pounding away, heard the distant slam of a door. Good. She was moving. She was escaping. Now he just had to survive long enough to follow her. The other two hostiles opened fire, muzzle flashes lighting up the corridor in stroboscopic bursts. Michael felt the impacts as rounds hit the body he was using as a shield, felt the hostile underneath him go limp as his own teammates' bullets found him. It was brutal, efficient, and exactly the kind of decision Michael had learned to live with years ago. Sometimes people died so others could live, and regret was a luxury for after the mission ended. He returned fire, controlled bursts aimed at the muzzle flashes, his training allowing him to maintain accuracy despite the chaos. One hostile went down with a scream that cut off abruptly. The other, the woman who'd offered him the deal, kept firing, kept moving, her professionalism evident in the way she used cover and maintained tactical awareness even in the darkness. Michael's weapon clicked empty. He dropped it, grabbed the pistol from the dead hostile's holster, and rolled sideways as rounds chewed up the floor where he'd been lying. The corridor was a killing zone, every angle covered, every movement potentially fatal. He needed to break contact, needed to reach Evelyn, needed to get them both out of this building before the Centurion group's overwhelming numerical advantage ground them down through sheer attrition. He pulled a flashbang grenade from the dead hostile's tactical vest. Thank God for enemies who came prepared, pulled the pin, and threw it toward the woman's last known position. The explosion was deafening in the enclosed space, the flash bright enough to see even through closed eyelids. Michael used the moment of disorientation to run, sprinting down the corridor toward the door where Evelyn had disappeared, trusting that the remaining hostile was too stunned to shoot accurately. Something burned across his shoulder, a round that missed killing him by inches but still drew blood. He kept running, hit the door with his shoulder, burst through into another corridor that looked exactly like the first one. The Javits Center was a maze of service passages and utility corridors, all of them identical, all of them potentially hiding more hostiles. "Evelyn!" His shout echoed off concrete walls. "Where are you?" "Here!" Her voice came from his left, and he found her crouched behind a maintenance cart, her suit torn and dirty, her carefully styled hair now wild around her face. She looked terrified and furious in equal measure, and when she saw the blood on his shoulder, her expression shifted to concern. "You're hurt. I'm functional. That's what matters." Michael grabbed her hand, pulled her up. "We need to keep moving. The corridor behind us is compromised, and there are probably more hostiles converging on our position. Chen, if you're still listening, I need extraction options immediately." His radio crackled, but the voice that answered wasn't Chen's. It was older, cultured, carrying the kind of authority that came from boardrooms and classified briefings. "Captain Cross, this is David Reeves. I believe you've been looking for me." Michael stopped moving, his blood turning to ice. David Reeves, former Deputy Director of Operations at the CIA, co-founder of the Centurion Group, one of the three people ultimately responsible for everything that had happened over the past week. He was on Michael's radio, which meant he'd somehow compromised their communications, which meant he'd been listening to every tactical discussion, every plan, every deployment order. The Centurion Group hadn't just infiltrated the venue's security. They'd penetrated the DIA's operational communications. "Reeves!" Michael's voice was carefully neutral, giving away nothing. "Where's Agent Chen?" "Indisposed at the moment. Nothing fatal, just temporarily unable to assist you. I wanted a chance to speak with you directly, Captain. Professional to professional. I respect what you've accomplished tonight. Taking down 6 of my operators is impressive work. You're living up to the Phantom legend. I'm not interested in your respect. I'm interested in getting Miss Zhao to safety and putting you in prison where you belong." "Prison," Reeves laughed, the sound hollow and bitter. "Captain, do you really think the American justice system is prepared to prosecute someone like me? I have files on everyone who matters, senators, judges, generals, intelligence directors. I know where all the bodies are buried because I helped bury most of them. Any attempt to put me on trial would expose operations that the government desperately wants to keep secret. They won't risk that exposure just to prosecute one contractor who got a little too entrepreneurial. Then maybe you won't make it to trial. Michael's tone made the threat explicit. Now we're being honest. I appreciate that. But Captain, you should understand your situation. You're trapped in a building with my people controlling every exit. The NYPD thinks this is a terrorist attack, and they've locked down the perimeter. No one gets out without being detained and processed. The FBI thinks you're a hostile operative who killed multiple security personnel. The DIA can't help you because I've convinced certain people in their chain of command that you've gone rogue, and Ms. Zhao is actually your hostage. Reeves paused, letting the implications sink in. You're alone, Captain. No backup, no extraction, no one who's going to save you. Your only option is to surrender, Ms.
Show to my people and hope that I'm feeling merciful enough to let you live. Michael looked at Evelyn, saw the growing understanding in her eyes as she processed what they were hearing. They'd walked into a trap more comprehensive than anything Michael had anticipated. The Centurion group hadn't just planned to attack the ceremony. They'd orchestrated a complete tactical and political isolation, turning every potential ally into either an enemy or an obstacle. You've got one thing wrong, Reeves. Michael kept his voice steady, projecting confidence he didn't entirely feel. I'm not alone. I have Evelyn Zhao, and she's worth more than your entire organization. She's smart enough to expose your operations, brave enough to testify against you, and principled enough to die for what she believes in. You're afraid of her because you know that even if you kill her tonight, she's already set in motion events you can't control. You've already lost. You just don't know it yet. A silence on the radio. Then, eloquent, Captain, but ultimately irrelevant. My people will find you within the next 10 minutes. When they do, they have orders to kill you and extract Ms. Zhao. This is your last chance to end this without more bloodshed. Surrender now, and I'll make sure your daughter is cared for after you're gone. I'll even make sure she believes you died a hero instead of a failure who got himself killed protecting someone who wasn't worth the sacrifice. The radio went dead, and Michael fought the rage that threatened to overwhelm his tactical thinking. Reeves had mentioned Sophie deliberately, specifically, using her as psychological warfare to make Michael emotional and irrational. It was a classic intelligence technique. Find your target's pressure point and press until they broke. But Michael had been pressed before. He'd operated under psychological pressure that would have destroyed most people. He'd learned to compartmentalize, to separate the mission from personal emotion, to function even when everything inside him was screaming. We need to move. Michael pulled Evelyn toward a stairwell marked with an exit sign. Up, not down. Everyone's expecting us to try for ground-level exits. We go up, find a position we can defend, and wait for actual friendly forces to sort this out. Michael, you're bleeding badly. That shoulder wound needs treatment. Evelyn's voice carried genuine worry. Later. Right now, we need altitude and defensible space. They climbed the stairs rapidly, Michael's shoulder screaming protest with every movement, his hand leaving bloody prints on the railing. They emerged on the third floor into an area that appeared to be administrative offices, cubicles, conference rooms, the generic corporate infrastructure that existed behind every major venue. Michael found a corner office with windows overlooking 11th Avenue and the Hudson River beyond. He wedged a chair under the door handle, creating a temporary barrier, then moved to the window to assess their position. 3 floors up, windows that probably didn't open, surrounded by thousands of people and hundreds of law enforcement officers who'd been told he was a threat. Perfect. What now? Evelyn had found a first aid kit in the office bathroom and was already pulling out gauze and antiseptic. We can't stay here forever. We don't need forever. We just need long enough for Director Walsh to realize what's happening and send people he trusts personally. Michael let her tend to his shoulder, grimacing as she cleaned the wound. The bullet had carved a furrow through muscle but hadn't hit anything critical. He'd had worse injuries and kept fighting. Reeves is smart, but he's not omnipotent. He managed to compromise some of our communications and confuse the immediate response. But the DIA has protocols for exactly this kind of situation. Walsh will activate them, and when he does, we'll have real backup. How long will that take? Best case, 20 minutes. Worst case, an hour. Michael checked his borrowed pistol, half a magazine remaining,
maybe 8 rounds. Not enough for a sustained firefight, but enough to make anyone think twice about breaching the office. "We can hold that long." Evelyn finished bandaging his shoulder and sat beside him with her back against the wall, finally allowing herself to show the exhaustion and fear she'd been suppressing. "I'm sorry. This is my fault. If I hadn't testified, if I just kept quiet about the Centurion Group's corruption, none of this would be happening. You'd still be living peacefully with Sophie, and I wouldn't have dragged you into a war you didn't ask for." "Stop." Michael's tone was firm but not unkind. "You did the right thing, testifying about security vulnerabilities that threaten national security. That took courage most people don't have. The fact that doing the right thing made you a target doesn't make it wrong. It just makes the people attacking you evil." Evil is such an absolute word. Aren't they just people doing what they think is necessary? Protecting their interests, their organization, their profits? Evelyn was playing devil's advocate, but Michael heard the genuine question underneath. Evil isn't about motivation. It's about actions and their consequences. The Centurion Group sells access to American military systems to hostile foreign governments. They kill people who expose their corruption. They threaten children to control their parents. Those actions cause harm that they could choose not to cause, which makes them evil regardless of their internal justifications. Michael reloaded his pistol methodically, his hands steady despite the blood loss. "I've killed people, Evelyn. A lot of people. Some of them probably had families who loved them, dreams they wanted to achieve, reasons for doing what they did. But they were trying to harm innocents, and stopping them required violence. That doesn't make me evil. It makes me someone who chose to protect others at personal cost. There's a difference. And if we die tonight? If the Centurion Group wins and we end up as just another set of casualties in their war against accountability? Was the cost worth it then?" Michael was quiet for a moment, considering the question honestly. "I don't know. Maybe Sophie will think I wasted my life protecting a stranger when I should have been protecting her. Maybe history will remember this as a failure instead of a stand. But I know that if I'd walked away, if I'd let Marcus Webb kill you at that gala, I wouldn't be able to live with myself. Some things matter more than survival. You taught me that when you refused to hide after the first attempt on your life." A sound in the hallway cut off whatever Evelyn might have said next. Footsteps, multiple people, moving with tactical precision toward their position. Michael stood, positioned himself between the door and Evelyn, his weapon raised and ready. The chair wedged under the door handle wouldn't stop a determined breach, but it would buy seconds, maybe enough seconds to matter. "Evelyn, get in the bathroom and lock the door. If they breach this office, you stay hidden no matter what you hear. Understand? I'm not leaving you to fight alone. You're not fighting at all. You're surviving. That's the mission. Keep you alive long enough to testify against these bastards." Michael didn't take his eyes off the door. "Please, go." She went, her footsteps reluctant, and Michael heard the bathroom door close and lock. He was alone now, one operator with limited ammunition facing unknown numbers of hostiles in a confined space with no backup and no escape route. It was a situation designed to result in his death, and he accepted that possibility with the calm that came from years of confronting mortality. But he wouldn't die easily, and he wouldn't die without taking enough of them with him that Evelyn might survive whatever came next. The door handle turned slowly, testing, then more forcefully. Then something heavy hit the door, a battering ram or a booted foot, hard enough to splinter wood. The chair held for one impact, two, then gave way on the third. The door burst open, and Michael started shooting. He dropped the first hostile through the doorway with 2 rounds center mass, saw the second one stumble back as a bullet caught his shoulder, and engaged the third before his weapon clicked empty. Out of ammunition, out of time, out of options except the ones you created with your bare hands and whatever the enemy brought to the fight. Michael dropped the pistol, grabbed a desk lamp, and swung it like a club into the face of the hostile trying to enter. The man went down, blood streaming from a broken nose, and Michael took his weapon, a compact submachine gun that felt solid and familiar in his hands. He turned to face the next wave, ready to sell his life as expensively as possible. But the next person through the door wasn't a hostile. It was Colonel Sarah Hendricks wearing tactical gear and carrying a rifle that looked like it had seen recent use. Behind her came Director Walsh, Agent Chen, with a bandage on his head, and half a dozen operators in DIA insignia. "Stand down, Captain." Hendrick's voice carried absolute authority. It's over. We've secured the building. Michael lowered his weapon slowly, his mind struggling to process the sudden reversal. How? Reeves got cocky. He used his own voice on your compromised radio frequency, which let us trace his location. Turns out he was running this operation from a mobile command center 3 blocks away. We hit it hard, took him alive, and extracted his communications gear. Walsh looked exhausted but triumphant. Once we had proof that he'd been impersonating federal agents and ordering attacks on civilians, every law enforcement agency in New York suddenly became very cooperative. NYPD is rounding up the remaining Centurion operators now. And the other founders, Chen and Locke? In custody. They were coordinating from different locations, but once we had Reeves, we had their positions too. It's over, Captain. The Centurion group is finished. Walsh walked further into the office, surveyed the damage. Bullet holes in the walls, blood on the floor, the desperate last stand Michael had been prepared to make. You did good work tonight. Ms. Zhao? In the bathroom, safe. Michael felt the adrenaline draining away, leaving exhaustion and pain in its wake. His shoulder throbbed, his head hurt, and every muscle felt like it had been used beyond its limits. Someone should probably tell her it's safe to come out. Evelyn emerged without prompting, her expression cycling rapidly through relief, disbelief, and something that looked like she wanted to hug everyone and then maybe scream at them. Is it really over? No more attacks, no more running, no more fearing every stranger might be an assassin. It's really over. Director Walsh's confirmation carried the weight of authority. The Centurion Group's leadership is in custody. Their operational network is being dismantled, and we have enough evidence to prosecute everyone involved. You'll still need to testify, but you'll do it in a courtroom under proper security, not under threat of death. Michael sat heavily in the desk chair, finally allowing himself to feel the accumulated damage from the night's fighting. My daughter. I need to call Sophie, make sure she knows I'm okay. Already taken care of. Colonel Hendricks handed him a phone. Agent Morrison called her 10 minutes ago, told her Daddy was fine and would visit tomorrow. She said to tell you she finished her wizard book and wants to know if dragons and wizards ever team up because that would be a good story. Michael felt something break inside him, the careful control that had kept him functional through the crisis, the compartmentalization that let him face death without flinching. He put his face in his hands and just breathed, letting the relief wash over him in waves that felt like drowning and salvation simultaneously. Evelyn knelt beside him, her hand on his uninjured shoulder. Thank you for everything. For saving my life multiple times, for risking Sophie's safety, for being willing to die so I could live. I don't have words adequate for that kind of debt. You don't owe me anything. Michael's voice was muffled by his hands. You gave me purpose again. You reminded me why I learned to fight in the first place. Not to destroy, but to protect. That's worth more than you know. They stayed like that for a moment. Two people who'd survived something that should have killed them, processing the aftermath while federal agents secured the building and law enforcement processed hundreds of witnesses. Eventually, Michael stood, accepted medical attention from a paramedic who appeared with a proper first aid kit, and allowed himself to be escorted out of the Javits Center into a New York night that felt surreal in its normalcy. The city continued around them. Traffic, pedestrians, the eternal motion of Manhattan unconcerned with the small drama that had played out inside the convention center. Michael breathed in the October air, felt the pain in his shoulder, and thought about Sophie waiting for him in Boston with questions about wizards and dragons and whether her father would be coming home. He would be coming home. Finally, permanently, without looking over his shoulder for threats that might never materialize. The Centurion Group was finished, and with them, the immediate danger that had defined his life for the past week. Director Walsh approached as Michael was being loaded into an ambulance for transport to a hospital. Captain, I know you're exhausted and injured, but I need to ask about your plans. The DIA would very much like to keep you on in some capacity. Your skills are too valuable to waste on corporate security. My plans involve being a father to my daughter and maybe, if she'll have me, continuing to work for Ms. Zhao protecting things that actually matter, instead of classified operations that most people will never know happened. Michael met Walsh's gaze steadily. I'm done with the shadows, Director. I want to live in the light for a while, see how that feels. Walsh nodded. understanding. Then live in the light, Captain. You've earned it. But if you ever change your mind, if civilian life gets too quiet and you need the adrenaline again, you call me. The door's always open. The ambulance pulled away, carrying Michael toward medical treatment and eventually toward the life he'd been trying to build for 8 years. A life where being Michael Carter wasn't a cover identity, but simply who he was. Where protecting people meant building security systems instead of killing threats. Where his daughter could know him as a father who'd done difficult things for good reasons instead of a ghost wearing skin. Evelyn rode in the ambulance with him, still processing everything that had happened. What do we do now, after this? Now? Michael smiled slightly, tiredly. Now you go back to running your company and testifying in court and proving that standing up against corruption was worth all of this. And I keep you safe while you do it, because apparently that's what I'm good at. We build something normal out of all this chaos. Normal sounds good. Evelyn leaned back against the ambulance wall, closing her eyes. Normal sounds really, really good. The ambulance navigated through Manhattan traffic, its sirens clearing a path, and Michael let himself hope that maybe, finally, normal was actually possible. The Centurion group was defeated. The immediate threats were neutralized. Sophie was safe in Boston, waiting for her father to come home. Maybe this time the peace would last. Maybe this time the life he built wouldn't be a cover story, but something real and sustainable. Maybe this time, being Michael Carter instead of Phantom would be enough. The city lights blurred past the ambulance windows, and Michael closed his eyes, letting exhaustion pull him toward sleep. Tomorrow he'd deal with medical treatment and debriefings and all the bureaucratic aftermath of tonight's chaos. Tomorrow he'd call Sophie and explain everything in terms a 7-year-old could understand. Tomorrow he'd figure out what came next. But tonight, he just breathed and bled and survived, which was all anyone could really ask for. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and recycled air, the particular sterile quality that all medical facilities seem to share regardless of their reputation or location. Michael woke to fluorescent lights and the steady beep of monitoring equipment, his shoulder wrapped in fresh bandages and his body feeling like he'd been hit by a truck. A nurse appeared almost immediately, checked his vitals with practiced efficiency, and informed him that he'd been asleep for 14 hours. 14 hours. Sophie would be worried sick. There's a little girl who's been calling every 2 hours asking about you. The nurse smiled, adjusting his IV. Agent Morrison has been very patient explaining that you need rest, but I think she's about out of patience. Would you like me to get her on the phone? Please. Michael's voice was rough from disuse and whatever medications they'd given him for pain. The nurse handed him a phone, and moments later, Sophie's voice filled the room with a mixture of relief and reproach. Daddy, you said you'd call last night. Agent Morrison said you were sleeping, but I thought maybe you were hurt worse than they told me, and I was really scared, and… Sophie, sweetheart, breathe. Michael interrupted gently, his heart aching at the fear in her voice. I'm okay. I was hurt a little bit, but the doctors fixed me up and I just needed to sleep. I'm sorry I scared you. Are you coming home today? The hope in her question was almost painful. Not today, maybe tomorrow. The doctors want to make sure I'm completely healed before they let me leave. But Agent Morrison will bring you to visit this afternoon if you want. Would you like that? Yes. I want to see that you're really okay, and not just telling me you're okay because you think I'm too young to handle the truth. Sophie's tone suggested she'd been thinking about this a lot. I'm 7 now, Daddy. I can handle more than you think. Michael felt a lump in his throat. When had his daughter gotten so perceptive, so mature? You're right. You can handle more than I give you credit for. When you visit this afternoon, I'll answer any questions you have. Honest answers. Deal? Deal. I love you, Daddy. I love you too, sweetheart. More than anything in the world. The call ended, and Michael lay back against the pillows, staring at the ceiling and trying to process everything that had happened. The Centurion group was finished. Reeves, Chen, and Locke were in federal custody, their network dismantled, their operations exposed. Evelyn was safe. Sophie was safe. The immediate crisis was over, which meant he could finally stop operating in survival mode and start thinking about what came next. What came next felt both terrifying and liberating. For 8 years, he'd hidden behind the identity of Michael Carter, janitor, single father, ordinary man with an extraordinary past. But that identity had always been temporary, a cover that could be shed when necessary. Now, for the first time since Afghanistan, he had the opportunity to decide who he actually wanted to be. Did he want to keep working for Evelyn, building security systems and protecting infrastructure? Did he want to return to government service in some capacity, using his skills for operations that might actually make a difference? Did he want to try for something completely different, maybe teaching or consulting or any of the thousand civilian careers that existed for people who weren't defined by their ability to kill efficiently? The door opened, interrupting his contemplation, and Evelyn walked in carrying a bag from a bagel shop and looking significantly better than she had the previous night. She'd showered, changed into casual clothes that actually fit, and somehow managed to look like a successful CEO rather than someone who'd nearly been assassinated less than 24 hours ago. "You're awake." She set the bag on the bedside table, pulled up a chair. "I brought breakfast." "Well, lunch technically, since it's almost noon. The nurses said you could have solid food, so I got you everything bagel with cream cheese and a coffee that's probably cold by now, but better than hospital coffee." "Thank you." Michael accepted the bagel gratefully, suddenly aware of how hungry he was. "How are you holding up? Last night was intense." "Last night was the most terrifying experience of my life, and I once had to present to a board of directors who were trying to force me out of my own company." Evelyn's attempt at humor fell slightly flat, but the effort was appreciated. "I spent this morning giving statements to approximately 9 different law enforcement agencies, all of whom wanted to know every detail of what happened. Then I had a conference call with my board explaining why their CEO was involved in a gunfight at a tech summit. That was almost as scary as the actual gunfight." "What did you tell them?" "The truth. That I testified against corrupt contractors, that they tried to kill me, and that the man I hired to protect me did his job spectacularly well. The board voted unanimously to give you a bonus, by the way. Apparently surviving multiple assassination attempts and saving the CEO's life is worth a significant financial incentive." She pulled out a folder from her bag, set it on the table. "That's the official offer. Director of Corporate Security, generous salary, full benefits, and a signing bonus that should cover Sophie's college education twice over." Michael looked at the folder without opening it. "You don't have to do this. The threat is over. The Centurion Group is finished. You could hire any security professional in the country now without worrying about hidden threats." "I could, but I want someone who's proven they'll risk everything to keep me safe. Someone who understands that security isn't just about preventing threats. It's about being willing to stand between those threats and the people who matter." Evelyn leaned forward, her expression serious. "Michael, I'm not offering you this position out of gratitude or obligation. I'm offering it because you're the best person for the job, and because I trust you completely. That's worth more than any resume or credentials." "I need to talk to Sophie first. She's been through a lot this week, and I can't make decisions about my career without considering what she needs. She's my priority. She always will be." "I know. That's part of why I trust you. Your priorities are clear, and you never compromise on them. Talk to Sophie. Take whatever time you need. The offer will be there when you're ready." Evelyn stood, moved toward the door, then paused. "For what it's worth, I think Sophie would be proud of what you did. You didn't just save my life. You stopped people who were hurting others and would have continued hurting people if they hadn't been stopped. That matters. It matters to me, and I think it would matter to her too." She left, and Michael sat alone with the job offer, the cold bagel, and his thoughts. Through the hospital room window, he could see Boston in daylight, the city going about its business, unaware of the battle that had been fought to keep it safe. Most people would never know about the Centurion Group, never understand how close their critical infrastructure had come to being compromised by corruption and greed. They'd live their lives in blissful ignorance, protected by people they'd never meet doing jobs they'd never hear about. That used to bother Michael. When he was Phantom, conducting operations that would never be acknowledged, he'd felt invisible in a way that went beyond tactical necessity. He'd felt erased, like his sacrifices didn't matter because they couldn't be recognized. But now, looking at that ordinary city full of ordinary people, he understood that the invisibility was the point. The best security was the kind nobody noticed because it prevented threats before they materialized. Maybe that was the life he wanted. Not the shadows of classified operations, but the background work of keeping systems safe and people protected. Maybe being Michael Carter, Director of Corporate Security, was exactly who he was supposed to be. The afternoon arrived with Sophie, escorted by Agent Morrison, who looked tired but satisfied. The little girl burst into the room with the unrestrained energy of a 7-year-old who'd been worried and was now relieved, throwing herself at Michael's bed with enough force to make him wince.
Careful, sweetheart. Daddy's still healing. But he wrapped his good arm around her anyway, held her close, breathed in the scent of her kid's shampoo, and felt something in his chest unclench. She was here. She was safe. Everything else was secondary. Agent Morrison said you were very brave. Sophie pulled back to look at him seriously. He said you saved a lot of people and stopped bad guys who were hurting others. Is that true? It's true. There were some very bad people who wanted to hurt Miss Zhao, and I stopped them. It was dangerous, and I got hurt doing it, but everyone who matters is safe now. Michael chose his words carefully, telling the truth without overwhelming her with details she didn't need. I'm sorry I scared you, sweetheart. I never want you to worry about me. But that's what people do when they love someone. They worry. Sophie's logic was simple and devastating. I'm always going to worry about you, Daddy, just like you worry about me.
That's how families work. Agent Morrison cleared his throat from the doorway. I'll give you two some privacy. Sophie, I'll be right outside if you need me. He left, closing the door gently behind him. Michael gestured for Sophie to sit beside him on the bed, adjusting carefully to avoid jostling his injured shoulder. You said you had questions for me. Honest answers. What do you want to know? Sophie thought about this seriously, her face scrunched in concentration. Are you still going to be a janitor? Or are you going to be whatever you were before, the soldier thing that Agent Morrison wouldn't explain properly? I'm going to be something in between. Ms. Zhao offered me a job protecting her company and the important work they do. It's not being a soldier, but it uses some of the same skills I learned when I was. And it's not being a janitor anymore, though there's nothing wrong with being a janitor. It's being someone who keeps people safe for a living. Like a superhero, but without the costume? Michael smiled despite himself. Kind of like that, yes. Except superheroes are fictional, and I'm just a regular person who's good at a very specific job. I don't have powers. I just have training and experience. And you're very good at it. Sophie stated this like a fact, not a question. The bad people tried really hard to hurt you and Ms. Zhao, and they couldn't because you're too good at protecting people. That's a superpower even if it came from training. When did you get so smart? I've always been smart. You just usually treat me like I'm younger than I am. Sophie's observation was delivered without accusation, just honest assessment. I know things are different now. I know that you're not just my daddy who cleans buildings. You're someone who used to do important, dangerous work, and now you're doing it again. I'm okay with that, as long as you always come home. I will always do everything in my power to come home to you. Michael pulled her close again, feeling the weight of that promise. But Sophie, I need you to understand something. The work I do might mean that sometimes I'm in danger. I'll always be as careful as I can, and I'll always have people backing me up, but I can't promise that nothing will ever happen to me. What I can promise is that I'll fight with everything I have to make sure I come back to you. Is that enough? Sophie was quiet for a long moment, her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. It has to be enough, because you're going to do this work either way, right? You're going to protect people because that's who you are. So I can either be scared all the time that you won't come home, or I can trust that you're really good at your job and that you love me enough to be careful. I think the second option is better. Michael felt tears prick his eyes. How had he raised such an incredible child? The second option is definitely better. And Sophie, I want you to know that Ms. Zhao's company is going to help us. We're going to have a nice apartment, and you can go back to your regular school with your friends, and things are going to be as normal as possible. The safe house, the agents, all of that is ending. You get your life back. Do you get your life back too? Sophie's question was perceptive, cutting to the heart of what Michael was still figuring out. I think so. I think maybe for the first time in 8 years, I get to stop hiding and just be who I actually am. That's a gift, sweetheart. One I wouldn't have without everything that happened this week. He kissed the top of her head. Now tell me about your wizard book. Did the dragons and wizards team up like you wanted? Sophie launched into an animated summary of her book, complete with dramatic gestures and voices for different characters, and Michael listened with the full attention she deserved. This was what mattered, not the operations he'd completed or the threats he'd neutralized, but the small moments with his daughter, where he got to be simply a father who cared about wizards and dragons and whether the story had a good ending. 3 days later, Michael was discharged from the hospital with instructions to take it easy for 2 weeks while his shoulder healed properly. Sophie had returned to her regular school in Dorchester, the federal agents had withdrawn to less intrusive oversight, and life was attempting to return to something approximating normal. Michael spent his recovery time in his apartment, dealing with the bureaucratic aftermath of the New York incident and trying to figure out how to transform his living space from temporary shelter into actual home. Evelyn visited regularly, bringing work documents that needed his review and updates on the legal proceedings against the Centurion Group. The case was solid. Reeves, Chen, and Locke faced charges ranging from conspiracy to attempted murder to treason. Their former operatives were cooperating in exchange for reduced sentences, and the entire network was being methodically dismantled by federal prosecutors who'd been waiting years for this opportunity. They're talking about a congressional hearing. Evelyn sat in Michael's living room, drinking tea from a mug with cartoon dragons on it, one of Sophie's contributions to the household items. They want me to testify again this time about the attacks and how the Centurion Group tried to silence whistleblowers. It'll be public, televised, the whole spectacle. How do you feel about that? Michael was reviewing security protocols for Zhao Systems headquarters, making notes about improvements that could be implemented. Terrified, relieved, determined. Evelyn set down her tea carefully. I spent years building my company on the principle that security requires transparency, that we can't protect systems if we're not willing to talk honestly about their vulnerabilities. Now I have a chance to apply that principle to human systems, to show that transparency about corruption is how we fix it. I'm scared of the attention, but I think it's necessary. You'll have security for the hearing, federal protection, plus whatever additional measures we want to implement, and I'll be there if you want me there. Michael looked up from his notes, not as your bodyguard this time, just as someone who believes in what you're doing and wants to support it. I'd like that. Having you there would make the whole thing less intimidating. Evelyn hesitated, then continued. Michael, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest. Do you actually want this job with Zhao Systems, or are you accepting it because you feel obligated after everything that happened? Michael set down his pen, gave her question the consideration it deserved. 2 weeks ago, I would have said I was accepting because I didn't have better options and Sophie needed stability. But now, I actually want it. Not because of obligation or lack of alternatives, but because I believe in what your company does. Protecting infrastructure, securing systems that people depend on, making sure that technology serves humanity rather than exploiting it, that matters. It's meaningful work that uses my skills for something constructive instead of just destructive. So yes, I want the job. If the offer's still open. The offer's still open. It'll always be open. Evelyn smiled, genuine and warm. When can you start? Give me another week to heal and get Sophie properly settled. Then I'm yours. Michael extended his hand and they shook on it with the formality of two professionals entering a legitimate business relationship. But underneath the professionalism was something else, mutual respect, hard-won trust, and the kind of partnership that came from surviving impossible situations together. The week passed quickly, filled with ordinary tasks that felt extraordinary because they represented actual normal life. Michael enrolled Sophie in an after-school program that she was excited about. He signed a lease on a better apartment in a safer neighborhood. He bought furniture that wasn't temporary, hung pictures on walls he planned to look at for years, and slowly transformed his living space from tactical position into home. On his first official day at Zhao Systems, Michael arrived early, wearing a suit that felt foreign after months in a janitor's uniform, but fit well enough to be comfortable. His office was exactly as he'd left it, sparse, professional, with windows overlooking the Charles River and Cambridge beyond. He spent the morning meeting with the security team, establishing protocols and reviewing current systems. He spent the afternoon in meetings with Evelyn and her executives,
discussing long-term security strategy and how to prevent future threats. It was exhausting and bureaucratic and occasionally frustrating, and Michael loved every minute of it. Jennifer Park stopped by his office at the end of the day with coffee and what looked like genuine curiosity. "Mr. Carter, can I ask you something? Everyone's been talking about what happened in New York, and there are all these rumors about who you were before you worked here."
Some people are saying you were special forces. Others are saying you were CIA. One person claimed you were a bodyguard for the president. What's the truth? Michael considered how much to share, then decided that partial transparency was better than continued mystery. "I was a soldier who specialized in protecting people and completing difficult missions. The details are classified, but the basic truth is that I spent a lot of years learning how to keep people safe in dangerous situations. Then I got hurt, retired, and spent 8 years trying to be a normal person. It didn't quite work out, so now I'm using those old skills in a new context. That's the truth. Maybe not as exciting as the rumors, but accurate." "That's plenty exciting," Jennifer smiled. "For what it's worth, everyone's glad you're here. Miss Zhao seems happier, more confident, and the rest of us feel safer knowing someone with your skills is looking after the company. So thank you, I guess, for being willing to do this work." "Thank you for making me feel welcome. It means more than you know." Michael meant it. After 8 years of hiding, being accepted for who he actually was felt like a gift he hadn't expected. That evening, Michael picked up Sophie from school, and they walked home together through Cambridge streets now painted gold by October sunset. Sophie chattered about her day, a science project about volcanoes, a conflict with a friend that had been resolved at lunch, her teacher's announcement about an upcoming field trip to a museum. Normal 7-year-old concerns, blissfully free of danger and drama. "Daddy, are you happy now?" Sophie asked suddenly as they waited for a crosswalk light. "What makes you ask that?" "You seem different, less worried, like you're not always watching for bad things to happen." She swung his hand in hers, unconcerned with the pedestrians around them. "I like it when you're relaxed." "Mom, I'm happy, sweetheart. Happier than I've been in a long time. I have a job I believe in, I'm not hiding anymore, and I get to come home to you every day. That's more than I thought I'd have after everything that happened." Michael squeezed her hand gently. "Are you happy? Is this life okay for you?" "It's good. Better than the safe house. Definitely better than when you were always worried about someone finding us. I like our new apartment. I like my school. I like that Agent Morrison isn't following us everywhere anymore." Sophie grinned. "He was nice, but it's better when it's just us." They crossed the street, walked the remaining blocks to their new apartment building, a modest 3-story structure in a neighborhood that was safe without being isolated. Their apartment was on the 2nd floor, 2 bedrooms, more space than they'd had before. Sophie had decorated her room with posters of dragons and wizards, her growing book collection organized on shelves Michael had assembled, her artwork displayed on walls with the pride of a gallery exhibition. Michael made dinner, pasta with vegetables, nothing fancy but satisfying, and they ate together at their small table, talking about everything and nothing. After dinner, Sophie did homework while Michael reviewed security reports on his laptop, the two of them working in comfortable silence. Later, he read her a chapter from her current book, kissed her goodnight, and stood in her doorway watching her fall asleep with the contentment that came from knowing she was safe and happy and exactly where she belonged. This was the life he'd fought for. Not exciting, not glamorous, not anything that would be remembered by history or celebrated in classified briefings. Just a father and daughter building a normal existence in a world that had tried very hard to prevent that normalcy from happening. And it was enough. It was more than enough. 2 months passed with the steady rhythm of ordinary life. Michael established himself at Zhao Systems, implementing security improvements that made the company significantly more protected without being obvious about it. He hired additional personnel, trained them properly, created protocols that could withstand sophisticated attacks. He worked regular hours, came home to Sophie every evening, and slowly learned how to live without constantly expecting threats. Evelyn testified before Congress in late December, delivering a presentation about corporate corruption and the importance of whistleblower protection that was covered extensively by media outlets. Michael attended, sitting in the gallery with Sophie beside him, watching Evelyn speak truth to power with the same courage she'd shown throughout their entire ordeal. The hearing resulted in new legislation strengthening security requirements for defense contractors and increasing penalties for those who threatened witnesses. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. The trial of Reeves, Chen, and Locke began in January and concluded in March with guilty verdicts on all major charges. They were sentenced to lengthy prison terms that ensured they'd never threaten anyone again. Their former operatives received varying sentences based on their cooperation and level of involvement. The Centurion Group's assets were seized, its contracts canceled, its reputation destroyed so thoroughly that no one would dare try to rebuild it. Justice, imperfect and delayed, but ultimately served. On a warm April evening, Michael stood on the roof of Zhao Systems headquarters, looking out at Boston as twilight painted the city in shades of purple and gold. The Charles River reflected the sunset, and in the distance, he could see the neighborhoods where ordinary people lived ordinary lives, protected by systems they didn't think about, and security they never noticed. Evelyn joined him on the roof, carrying 2 bottles of beer and an expression that suggested she had something on her mind. "I've been thinking about what you said when you first agreed to work for me, about how some things matter more than survival, and how fear should inform our actions without controlling them. I wanted to thank you for teaching me that lesson." "I think you taught me as much as I taught you." Michael accepted the beer, took a long drink. "You showed me that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being terrified and doing the right thing anyway. That's harder than any operation I ever completed." "We make a good team then. The paranoid security expert and the stubborn CEO who refuses to hide." Evelyn smiled. "I'm glad you decided to stay. The company wouldn't be the same without you." "I'm glad I stayed too. This is the first time in 8 years I felt like I'm actually living instead of just surviving. That's worth everything I went through to get here." Michael looked at the city below, at the lights beginning to glow in windows as families gathered for dinner. "You know what the strangest part is? I spent so long trying to be invisible, trying to hide who I was and what I could do. But now that everyone knows, now that I'm visible and present and just existing as myself, it's actually easier. The hiding was harder than the honesty. That's because hiding requires constant energy. Being yourself just requires showing up as you are." Evelyn was quiet for a moment, then continued. "I've been getting offers. Other companies want me to consult on their security, speak at conferences, basically become the face of corporate transparency and whistleblower advocacy. I'm thinking about accepting some of them, expanding what Zhao Systems does beyond just our own operations. That would require additional security planning, more travel, more public exposure, more opportunities for bad actors to target you." Michael's tone was professional, assessing risks automatically. "But it's manageable. We'd need to expand the team, establish protocols for different scenarios, coordinate with local security at each venue. It's doable if you're serious about it." "I am serious. What happened with the Centurion Group? That can't be unique. There have to be other situations where corporations are compromising security for profit, where whistleblowers need protection, where truth needs defending. If I can help with that, if I can use my experience to make it easier for others to speak up, then that's worth doing." Evelyn looked at Michael directly. "But I'd need you to keep me safe while I do it. Not just as an employee, but as someone who believes in what we're doing and is willing to see it through. Can you do that?" "I can do that, for as long as you need me to." Michael's commitment was absolute. "But Evelyn, you need to understand that taking on that role will make you a permanent target for people who don't want transparency. It won't be like the Centurion Group, a single threat that can be eliminated. It'll be ongoing, evolving, something we have to stay vigilant about constantly. Are you ready for that?" "I don't know if anyone's ever ready for that, but I think it's necessary, and I think having you on my side makes it possible." Evelyn raised her beer bottle in a toast. "To necessary things that scare us but matter anyway." Michael clinked his bottle against hers. "To showing up as ourselves and hoping it's enough." They drank to that, standing on a rooftop in Boston as spring evening faded into night. Two people who'd survived impossible odds and chosen to use that survival for something meaningful. It wasn't the ending Michael had imagined when he first became a janitor 8 years ago. It was better, messier, more complicated, and more honest. The city lights glowed brighter as darkness deepened, and Michael thought about Sophie asleep in their apartment, dreaming about dragons and wizards and stories where the brave ones always won in the end. She was safe. Evelyn was safe. The immediate threats had been eliminated, and new challenges could be faced with preparation and support rather than desperation and improvisation. This was the life he'd chosen, not the shadows of classified operations, not the invisibility of hiding, but the visible work of protection and truth-telling and building something that mattered. It required courage every day, required showing up as himself without apology or camouflage, required accepting that some things were worth risking everything to defend. But he'd learned something important through everything that had happened. Courage wasn't something you possessed or lacked. It was something you practiced, something you chose repeatedly in small moments and large ones, something that grew stronger through use rather than weakening from exhaustion. And Michael Cross, formerly Phantom, formerly just a janitor, now director of corporate security at Zhao Systems, and father to an extraordinary 7-year-old girl, had learned to practice courage in all its forms. The courage to protect others, the courage to be known, the courage to build a life worth defending instead of just surviving through each day. He finished his beer, set the bottle aside, and looked at Evelyn. We should go. I promised Sophie I'd be home to help with her science project. Something about renewable energy that she's very excited about. Apparently saving the environment is her new passion. She sounds like someone I'd like to meet properly, not just in crisis situations. Evelyn gathered the empty bottles. Maybe dinner sometime? Your place or mine, somewhere normal where we can just be regular people, instead of people who survived assassination attempts together. I'd like that. Sophie would too. She keeps asking about the brave lady her daddy protects, and I think she's built you up into some kind of superhero in her imagination. Michael smiled. Fair warning, she'll probably ask you 1,000 questions about computers and cybersecurity and whether you've ever met any hackers. I can handle 1,000 questions from a curious 7-year-old. After everything else, that sounds refreshingly normal. They walked toward the roof access door, leaving the night sky behind. Thank you, Michael, for everything, for saving my life, for staying after you could have left, for believing that what we're doing matters. I don't say it enough, but it means everything. You don't need to keep thanking me. We're partners in this. You're doing the hard work of speaking truth, and I'm just making sure you survive long enough to do it. That's the deal. Michael held the door open for her. Besides, you gave me something I didn't know I needed, a purpose beyond just survival, a reason to stop hiding, and proof that choosing to protect others instead of just yourself is worth whatever cost comes with it. So really, I should be thanking you. They descended from the roof together, took the elevator down to the parking garage, said goodnight with the comfortable familiarity of colleagues who'd become genuine friends through shared trauma. Michael drove home through Cambridge streets now fully dark, the city alive with evening activity, and felt grateful for the ordinary traffic and the mundane frustration of finding parking and the completely normal experience of climbing stairs to his apartment where his daughter waited. Sophie was still awake despite her bedtime, sitting at the kitchen table with her science project spread out. Poster board, markers, printed images of solar panels and wind turbines. She looked up when Michael entered, her expression a mixture of guilt at being awake late and excitement about her project. Daddy, I know I should be in bed, but I had an idea about how to make my presentation better and I wanted to work on it while I remembered. She gestured at her poster with pride. What do you think? Michael looked at the poster, colorful, informative, clearly the work of someone who cared deeply about her topic. I think it's excellent. I think your teacher is going to be very impressed, and I think you should probably get to bed soon or you'll be too tired to present it properly. 5 more minutes, please? The universal plea of children everywhere, the negotiation that parents always lost because 5 minutes turned into 10 and then 15. 5 more minutes. Then bed, no arguments. Michael sat beside her, helped her position images on the poster board, listened as she explained her research about renewable energy and why it mattered for the future. He made suggestions when asked, praised her work genuinely, and marveled at how such a small person could contain such enormous curiosity and conviction. When the 5 minutes inevitably stretched to 20, Michael finally insisted on bedtime, tucked Sophie in with her current book, something about space exploration now, dragons and wizards having been temporarily displaced by astronauts and planets, and stood in her doorway as she fell asleep. This was what victory looked like, he realized. Not dramatic confrontations or tactical successes, but ordinary evenings with his daughter pursuing her interests and building her own understanding of how to make the world better. He'd spent 12 years conducting operations that protected national security, 8 years hiding from his past, and 1 intense week fighting to keep Evelyn alive. All of it had led here, to a modest apartment in Cambridge where a 7-year-old girl dreamed about renewable energy and space exploration, safe and happy, and entirely unaware of how close she'd come to losing her father. He'd survived Afghanistan. He'd survived 8 years of hiding. He'd survived the Centurion Group's attempts to kill him. He'd survived not because he was the best operator or the most skilled fighter, but because he'd had something worth surviving for, a daughter who needed him, and a principle that mattered more than safety. And now he had something more, a purpose that used his skills for construction instead of destruction, a community that knew who he was and valued him anyway, and a future that didn't require constant vigilance against threats that might never materialize. Michael walked to his own bedroom, the space still sparse but slowly accumulating the personal touches that made it his. He had photos on the nightstand now, Sophie at various ages, the two of them together at a park, a recent picture from her school where she smiled with uncomplicated joy. He had books on the shelf that he actually planned to read rather than just displaying for cover. He had a life that was his own, built on honesty instead of deception, sustained by choices he could be proud of rather than secrets he had to maintain. He lay down in bed, his shoulders still occasionally aching from the bullet wound, but mostly healed, and let himself feel the exhaustion that came from a day of meaningful work rather than desperate survival. Tomorrow he'd go back to Zhao's systems, continue building security protocols that protected important infrastructure. Tomorrow evening, he'd come home to Sophie and help with homework and make dinner and engage in all the mundane activities that constituted actual living. Tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. A future measured in ordinary moments rather than crisis responses, in steady progress rather than dramatic victories, in the quiet satisfaction of doing work that mattered without needing recognition or glory. Michael Cross closed his eyes and smiled. Somewhere in the darkness, Phantom had finally found peace, not by disappearing, but by being seen and choosing to stay visible anyway. The ghost had become a man, the weapon had become a protector, and the soldier had learned that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was simply show up as yourself and trust that it would be enough. Outside his window, Boston continued its eternal rhythm, traffic and voices, and the complex symphony of human civilization functioning because people showed up every day to maintain the systems that made it possible. Michael was one of those people now, no longer invisible but openly contributing, using his particular skills to keep others safe while living the life he'd fought so hard to build. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything he'd never dared to hope for, delivered through tragedy and violence and the stubborn refusal to let fear determine his choices. And tomorrow, when he woke up to help Sophie with breakfast before school and then drove to work where Evelyn was already planning their next security improvement, he'd do it all again. Not because he had to, not because he was hiding or surviving or fulfilling some obligation, but because he'd chosen this life, chosen to protect what mattered, chosen to be Michael Cross instead of Phantom or any other ghost. And in the end, choosing who you wanted to be, that was the only victory that truly mattered.